Chapter 10. A Monopoly of Truth. She hated to do it at this late hour, but Tasha put in a call to Inoue. She and Dixon were back in her office after spending a couple of hours gathering what preliminary data they could from the cavern entrance. As he came into view, Tasha said, "Inoue, I hate to wake you at this hour, but this couldn't wait. We broke through to the next chamber, and now we have a bit of a situation. You'll need to see this for yourself. Let me cue it up." The screen image split, with Inoue, Dixon, and Tasha on the left. On the right, the display panned over the glowing tube walls. "Oh my," was all he could manage. After a minute or so, Tasha broke in. "So, Inoue, we used Alcon panels where we could at each of the borehole entrances, then sealed the rest with Kapton sheeting and caulking. I doubt it's completely tight, but that's the best we could do until morning." She could tell he was listening, but his eyes were still glued to the video. "Got it. Of course, that was the right thing to do. I'm glad you took care of it before calling me. That tube has been sealed for 500 million years at least." Tasha responded, "We can only hope this ecosystem hasn't been irreversibly damaged. There are other directions available to expand our footprint, though that will add some cost. We'll try to keep this low-key, but I'm not hopeful that'll dampen the response. We have to stay proactive and control the messaging the best we can." Inoue regained full concentration for the task at hand. "Absolutely, Tasha. I'll check with the board, but I'm sure they'll agree. Our best move is to issue a statement ahead of rumors and leaks. We have good crews, but this is just too interesting to keep quiet. I'd like you and Mr. Dixon to draft something in the next few hours, then run it by me so we have something by, say, 7 a.m. You're the one who's made this discovery, so you have the honors. Can you do that?" The thought of answering a bunch of reporters' questions hadn't occurred to Tasha. "Okay, Inoue. I've never imagined having to do that, but I guess it's necessary. We'll have something ready." Kalu said, "Right, but try to get some sleep in there as well. Tomorrow could be a long day. Good night." Dixon was even more wary of the press, or perhaps just camera shy. "Ms. Nagorski, I can help you write a statement describing just how we found this, but I'm not real excited about being part of the news feed." Tasha smiled and patted the foreman's hand. "That's all right. I don't mind doing the talking, but you and your crew need to be there, or at least all who don't mind being seen. You know, this can work in favor of the frontier." Dixon looked puzzled. "How so, ma'am?" Tasha sat back in her chair and pulled the sleeves of her sweater back to her wrists. "Well, you know how folks on the frontier are portrayed back on Earth, and especially in MUNIS, right? They have no idea how hard life could be out here, especially in your work." Dixon sighed. "That's true. We don't get a lot of understanding or respect. The so-called entertainment on Earth shows us mostly as seedy, money-grubbing lowlifes." Tasha followed. "Exactly. You know the protocols we follow, like sealing that cave right away, or just being there when someone's life is in danger. Maybe we could show them that side of us. Such a portrayal won't be recirculated widely, but there's always that underground on Earth or Luna who appreciate the truth." Knowing he didn't have to be the front man, Dixon noticeably relaxed. "All right, I'll help you with the statement. It's pretty straightforward. I'll stand beside you, and we can get a shot of the crews who are working tonight. I'm sure most of them will get a big kick out of having their faces shown all over Earth and Luna." No one really slept that night, despite valiant attempts. In the morning, Tasha set up a group shot of the crews in front of their tunnelers. Everyone was outside in pressure suits near the boreholes. She and Dixon were front and off-center to fit everyone in. No reporters were at this remote location for the initial statement. Tasha began. "Good morning. My name is Tasha Nagorski, and this is Mr. Jet Dixon. To the people of Mars, Earth, and Luna. Last evening, at one of our outposts near the base of Olympus Mons, a fantastic discovery was made. In the process of connecting one lava tube to another, our tube boring crews discovered the most advanced life forms to date on this planet. Mr. Dixon here and his team came upon a vast underground space covered in bioluminescent organisms consisting of both plants and simple multicellular animals. In this announcement, we are broadcasting preliminary data from the find to the scientific community. The caverns were immediately resealed to preserve them as best we can. Following frontier protocols, we strive to minimize any damage to local ecosystems. At the same time, there is much knowledge to be gained. The goals of advancing human settlement and maintaining respect for other life forms are not mutually exclusive. Ongoing studies are to be conducted by scientific teams managed and approved by Star Olympus Corporation. Inquiries along those lines will be channeled through me or Mr. Enofe Kalub. Contact information can be found in the accompanying data packet. Mr. Dixon will now say a few words. The foreman proceeded. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say I'm very pleased to be a part of this discovery. I'm proud of my crew. They acted quickly upon making this amazing find, and in the most professional manner. Such unexpected events are notable rewards for their hard work. Thank you. With the recording stopped, Tasha addressed the crew over the common channel. Great work, guys. I probably don't have to say this, but be careful when it comes to the press. This thing is going to get super crazy for a while. In the meantime, we still have work to do. The alternative build-out point has been sounded, so we shouldn't have a repeat here. The bad news is there's no other chamber to dig into, so we'll have to create the space ourselves. You've had a long night, so get some rest to be ready by the time you come back. Dr. Safford had not been in her office 1 hour when her assistant rushed in. Dr. Safford, there's something you need to see, some kind of announcement from Olympus Mons. The administrator caught the end of Dixon's remarks, then replayed the message. What is Tasha Nagorski doing out there? Her assistant said. Just listen, ma'am. There's more to it. At first, the chairman thought this was some kind of hoax. Then the images and data of the chamber began streaming from Tasha's very high-resolution helmet cameras. Magnified many times, one could see many different types of creatures with thick armored exteriors, likely for the retention of water and various gases. She began muttering to herself, there's got to be something we can do. I have more than enough scientists here to take this on. And she's in charge? Those grubby colonists think they can handle this and grab all of the credit? What does she mean, managed and approved by Star Olympus Corporation? I'm not going to take this lying down. As yet, there had been no response from the Secretary General or any government officials regarding her synopsis of the Star Olympus project. This new announcement went out 30 minutes ago, so it had reached Earth and Luna by now. Nagorski had stolen the march on her. The question was, should she wait for guidance or make her own policy? It is easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission, she said to no one in particular. She called her assistant. Arrange a meeting for the operations committee as soon as it is convenient, but let them know there is important business to discuss regarding Olympus Mons. I'll be releasing an agenda shortly. Tasha wasted no time, having some idea what the reaction might be from Earth. Having done various freelance or contract engineering jobs for the bureaucracies, she knew how fearful and vindictive they could be. MUNIS was not her first rodeo. In a call with Enofe, she pointed out, you know, our project and recent find, in spite of reality, will be regarded as a threat. Kalu, having only a second-hand knowledge from parents and relatives, wasn't sure. Why do you say so, Tasha? And is there some course of action you had in mind? Taking a sip of her tea, she replaced the cup on her induction-heated coaster. Enofe, having worked among them and opposite less scrupulous contractors, major backlash is close to a certainty. Government types and their fellow travelers have elevated talents in their own eyes and those of the public. You know how they portray us. They don't dare let themselves be shown up. Power can't be maintained by force alone. To stay in control, they have to prop up the religion of superiority to keep the true believers in line. They can't be seen losing face with such developments, showing them for what they are. It's like saying the emperor has no clothes. Kala responded, I see what you mean. We'll accelerate the appointment of the scientific teams. There are some highly qualified people on Mars, and we won't have a problem finding those we need on Earth. We have contingency plans for this, but never the faintest notion they would be used. The insurers won't be very pleased, but I expect more private funding. Where do you suggest we start? Tasha replied. How about Van Leeuwen Corporation or Turtle Island? They've always been at the forefront. Remember, they formed the first consortium for settling in the Valles Marineris. Nofi smiled and said, of course, you're only saying what the rest of us are thinking. They're already stakeholders in this venture, and they love rubbing the stuck-up noses of space agencies in the dirt. Worried calls by representatives of fuel providers, cargo haulers, passenger lines, exalted universities, and think tanks began flooding Dr. Safford's office. Low-level aides of politicians joined the fray. This fully occupied an additional assistant. The department heads, members of the operations committee, were ready to meet. By subtle and not so subtle lobbying efforts, Dr. Safford had herself appointed as formal chairman. Parallel to this effort, she and her minions stirred up the MUNIS scientists. She told her assistant, Earth has realized they need someone here on the ground representing their interests and those of this station. No one quite knew what to expect from this meeting. Everyone was there, including Dr. Kaido Suzuki, director of the Canadian Biolab, and part of the UN Exobiology Cooperative. Generally, subordinates were not present, but Thomas Safford was there at his side. The new chairman opened by saying, the repercussions of this new colonist activity are vast. I don't have to tell you that a number of interests may be affected, including your own and those of this station. Abernathy was looking especially irritated. When construction on that maglev line started, I noted there must be something more going on. They were not just building a road to nowhere. Now our colonization efforts appear weak. The chairman tried to put the man at ease. Yes, Mr. Abernathy, we do remember. But let's save the discussion until I finish, please. I am in contact with the UN and several of our key partners. The fate of Mars is by no means settled. This is a question of our rights and what resources we have at our disposal. I've called this meeting to discuss our options and what we may bring to bear. Our charter has always been the exploration of Mars, identification of natural resources, as well as the study of new life forms where we find them. This is not the place for amateurs or the otherwise unqualified to be mucking about. When it came time for a discussion, Dr. Suzuki was the first to speak. I, for one, ma'am, am horrified at the thought of prospectors and opportunists doing irreparable damage to those organisms, which, I must remind everyone, were recklessly stumbled upon by their machines. We have the best exobiologists on the planet, and it is they who need to be directing any studies. The chairman was pleased that her earlier agitation efforts were bearing fruit. I see your point, Doctor. Perhaps you could put some thought into what and who such a study might require. Abernathy had been holding his tongue until now, but let loose. Madam Chairman, Dr. Safford, we are all aware of the plans for Mars, agreed to by the key players on Earth. We are far behind on the development of this colony, and now those chickens have come home to roost. Those controlling the key infrastructure will control Mars. That includes transportation networks, communications, natural resources, as well as any benefits to be derived from new life forms, be they pharmaceutical or agricultural. Surely there is historical precedent for what we know we must do. Dr. Cassini became more uncomfortable the longer this meeting went on. Mr. Abernathy, Dr. Safford, what exactly are you saying? There has been nothing but delay after delay and one budget excuse after another. My people have been sitting on their hands for 2 years now. Yes, there are plans, but so far we do nothing but talk. We should be applauding the efforts of these frontier companies. They are making Mars possible. We have always had a brain drain. This is a fact, yet no one wishes to examine the reasons why, which are simple. Earth and MUNIS care much more about control than they do for real progress and the needs of settlers. They want to let these pioneers do the dirty work, then swoop in to reap the profits. The priorities of their best people are precisely the opposite. Stares from the rest of the committee ranged from fear to contempt. Cassini didn't care. He had been silent far too long. Let them think what they wanted. He could not forgive himself had he not spoken his mind. Dr. Safford cleared her throat. Well, Dr. Cassini, we shall take your remarks under advisement. In the meantime, if each member of the committee could write up their recommendations and forward them to me, we can save a lot of time. Is there a motion to dismiss? Reporters were waiting for the meeting to end and Dr. Safford to emerge. Dr. Safford, Judy Stiles, Martian Times. Do you feel the MUNIS mission here is over? What are you hearing from Earth? She replied, On the contrary, our work here is only beginning. If Mars is to be mankind's next logical outpost in the solar system, then we have much to do. I can assure you that the UN and the leading space agencies on Earth are steadfastly committed to development. The activities of a few colonists will be of little consequence in the long run. A taller man raised his viewer to frame the chairman. Dr. Safford, Jacques Lafon, European Space Weekly. Are not the scientists here missing out on the greatest discovery of the last 50 years? Has anyone been invited to take part in the study of these new life forms? The chairman chose their words carefully. It is my personal belief, and that of the Operations Committee, that such discoveries are for the benefit of all mankind. The best minds must be made available for the analysis of this amazing windfall of potential knowledge. The reporter continued, Doctor, does that mean you will be taking over the cavern site on Olympus Mons? Safford gave a wry smile. We've issued no such statements to that effect. Needless to say, there are discussions going on both here and on Earth. I traded messages with the U.S. President's science advisor just this morning, but am not at liberty to give details at this time. In her tiny office on Olympus Mons, Tasha did a slow burn. She was irritated, but certainly not surprised at Safford's remarks. She told Brandon, Is Safford not the typical bureaucrat/politician, or what? I was hoping that we'd be out of her reach by now. You heard what she said without saying it. On a lighter note, how is progress on your end? Olson replied, Not bad at all. We've got crews, equipment, and track building toward each other in 15 sectors from the edge of the caldera. When we finish that, we can begin testing the 6G launch vehicles at the approaches, and switch yards are under construction. I have to admit, the planners here really have their act together. Nothing on Earth outside of the floating cities can move faster. Tasha responded, Thank goodness I also have great crews who don't need a lot of supervision. I'm spending a lot of time organizing the science teams. We're being flooded with requests. I had 57 new messages just this morning. Inofi is rounding up some extra help, but this is turning into a circus. A lot of people are going to be unhappy when we start paring down the proposals. It may sound funny, but that cavern has to be protected from the researchers. I remember reading something about the grizzly bears. There were so-called problem bears that would prey on livestock, get into garbage cans and whatnot. They would be relocated far into the backcountry. At the same time, there are researchers drugging the bears to tag, measure, or whatever else they needed to do. To knock them out, they'd hit them with PCP, and did this more than once for the same tagged bears. Is it a wonder that psychotropic drugs could cause erratic behavior? In a later call with Inofe, Tasha gave a brief update. I've got some people here from the Van Leeuwen University, Mars Annex. As you might guess, they're highly competent and very professional. I figured the first thing to do is get a detailed survey of the cavern so we can file the claim. At least that will get us established on the frontier. Kalu said, That's quick thinking. And how are you planning to do that? Tasha answered, When we walled off the space, we included airlocks and bulkheads with feed-throughs for instrumentation. I figured some limited access will be necessary, and that was the least intrusive. The folks from VLUM have already sent in sterilized drones to do the mapping. The atmosphere is actually thicker in there, and they can fly pretty easily. They'll go as far as they can to gather 3D measurements as a basis for our claim. Inoue laughed. Of course we shall release the details after the claims are filed. That's going to make some big waves on Earth. There's already talk of an emergency UN meeting. What the emergency is, I don't really know, other than bruised egos. When they find out Van Leeuwen Corporation is among the first to be involved, it will raise an even bigger stink. As you know, they have no ties with any government whatsoever, except where they are forced to pay taxes. They launch no payloads for them nor sell them anything unless life or limb is in jeopardy. Turtle Island and Viva Machines have the same policy. Only hours after Tasha spoke with Inoue, she received a nervous call from contractors on the surface. One of the outfits assembling the power grid was being blocked by MUNIS security. The foreman, Kayla Winthrop, informed her, "We've got about 20 people up here in the open with 3 APCs containing I don't know how many more. They're armed and pushing people around. We don't know where they landed since tracking units are not up yet. I think you'd better come. Some guy named Thomas Safford is babbling about treaty violations and a lot of other stuff I don't understand." Tasha replied, "Yes, I'm quite familiar with Mr. Safford. We expected trouble, but this is a whole new level. Keep your heads and make sure your helmet viewers and comms are recording everything. I'll be there as soon as I can." She knew Brandon and his crew were in the area laying track, but a few kilometers up the slope. Tasha made a quick call to let him know the situation. "Brandon, we've got some unexpected company. Thomas Safford is here with a good-sized goon squad. I'm coming to the surface to see what's going on. They're blocking our contractors from working and who knows what else. I'm sending you a recording so you know what Kayla just told me. I'll keep our private channel going so you can hear everything I do as it happens. Got it?" Brandon replied, "We've got you covered, Tash." Brandon out. Chapter 11. A Martian Standoff. When Tasha arrived on the surface, she found Kayla facing 4 armed security men, plus another in a non-uniformed pressure suit. As she approached, she saw the Canadian flag and an insignia for the UN exobiology group. It has to be that twit Thomas, she thought to herself. Opening the common channel, she asked, "Mr. Safford, do we have a problem here? What can we do for you?" Thomas thought he'd prepared, but wasn't ready to deal with Nagorski. "Ms. Nagorski, I am the assistant to Dr. Suzuki in the Canadian Biolab. I'm representing the Exobiology Cooperative. You could say also that I'm representing Earth. You and your people need to cease operations here and relinquish control of this delicate habitat." Tasha, beside Kayla, then stepped forward. She looked hard at Safford and laughed. "What? Are you serious? We've made our statement and nothing has changed. Do you really have nothing better to do with your time? You've come way out here to bark orders and harass people who are minding their own business. It was nice of you to bring your goons along, but you can just tell them to back off. We have more important things to do." Thomas figured the uniforms would do the trick, but didn't know Nagorski as well as he thought. Frustrated, he said, "I'm sure you're aware that such a find belongs to all mankind. You have no right to keep this to yourself. The Artemis Accords clearly state that space and the resources therein are for all of humanity, not just a selfish few." Tasha said, "Right, the Artemis Accords. So who determines the fate of such resources and which scholars or lay people will characterize new finds? A bunch of pencil necks in New York, Washington, or Brussels get to decide what's best for the rest of us ignorant slobs? We have qualified people on the ground, and we're bringing in more. What gives you the authority to interfere with this project or to push people around? Is anyone on the frontier signed these Artemis Accords? Has Star Olympus made any agreements with Earth, with the entire planet, plus the moon? I think not. It's time for you and your minions to pack up and go home. Tasha sensed hesitation in Safford's voice when he said, Tasha, you know I have the utmost respect for you. I even understand some of the reasons why you left, but please don't force my hand here. He tried his best to sound like a reasonable but powerful adult speaking to a child. Tasha offered only an icy stare. Thomas knew there and then this tack would fail. He'd have to follow through with action. Tasha then smiled. Thomas, are you threatening peaceful people with violence for some abstract cause you know little about? Or are you just here to make brownie points for yourself and Auntie Colleen? Brandon and his crews listened to the confrontation and planned for the worst. Packing what vehicles, equipment, and supplies they had, they hastened their return to the way station. He told one of his foremen, we don't have much in the way of weapons, so we'll just have to improvise. The vehicles should protect us from whatever they're packing. Back at the power relay, Thomas took a step back from Nagorski, raised his arm, then lowered it. The four officers behind him moved up, pointing their weapons at Tasha and Kayla. At the same time, more security officers poured out of the armored personnel carriers. They corralled contract crews on the surface while others roped down the lava tube sinkhole to the cavern below. There they rounded up anyone outside. Those inside portable habitats above and below initiated shutdown procedures for the airlocks. Tasha said, Thomas, you aren't going to prove anything with this. You're just making yourself, MUNIS, and shot callers back on Earth look ridiculous. Safford had already committed himself, along with the security detail. The only thing he could offer was, just shut up and this will all be over soon. Tasha continued, what are you going to do, blast your way into the habitats? Needlessly kill innocent people? I shouldn't even mention those options. You're just a scared kid. Anything could happen. Call off your minions. Get out of here before you do something you'll regret for the rest of your life. Angrily, Thomas shouted, it is you and your anarchist friends that are in the wrong. Anything I do here will be seen as restoring order. Tasha knew it was time to quit antagonizing him, or at least slow it down. She thought, he's so eager to make points and get ahead. He's capable of anything. Brandon has to be on his way by now. With all personnel connected by radio through their helmets or from the habitats, there was no way Thomas could stop them from communicating. The security men likely understood this, but could do nothing without ripping the transceivers out of everyone's pressure suit. Keeping her head, Tasha switched off her common channel input to activate a couple of private frequencies. She hoped that others had done the same. Hello? Is anyone receiving? This is Tasha Nagorski. Over. Slowly, her crews reported in. Okay, great. Is there anyone out there not being detained? I'm sure they won't have a head count. Maybe we can use that to our advantage. Over. Chet Dixon reported in. Copy that, Tasha. I've got 4 guys with me holed up behind that large escarpment near the supply tents. Only another 2 were available on the surface behind tents next to the habitat entrance. Even in the open, she would not be able to see them from here. Increasing dust had reduced visibility to maybe 100 yards with the onset of Martian winter. Tasha replied, whatever happens, we need to keep them occupied and away from the cavern entrance. It looks like most of them are tied up with us. Dixon responded, we know how many people we have. Their 3 APCs carry 12 in the back, plus a driver and gunner. There's also a ship nearby, but there can't be more than a couple more besides the pilot and co-pilot. Tasha came back. Good assessment there, Dixon. There can only be another 20 or so back at MUNIS, with most of them off duty. This has to be the most they could spare. They don't have enough people to run operations like this and maintain a presence at the station. That can work for us. But we have to move carefully. This Safford character could become a loose cannon, quite literally. Kayla then caught a sight which filled her with dread. Half a dozen drones flew away from the APCs toward them and fanned out. Through their helmets, she noticed Tasha speaking but could not hear her. She cycled through the encrypted channels until she found the right one. Tasha, we have a new problem. They've brought trackers. Have they rounded everyone up yet? Because if they haven't, Tasha said, oh, perfect. Dixon, did you get that? There are trackers loose with infrared and who knows what else. Do we have anything to counter them? Dixon replied, sure, Tasha. We've got survey drones and some light cargo carriers. We always keep them charged. Jankovic is pretty good at driving them. Jankovic, are you there? He and Park were still near the habitat entrance. Jankovic here. We're slipping into the tent now, where the drones are housed. What do you want us to do? Tasha cut in. This is Tasha. We need to eliminate the threat of those trackers, or you'll all be caught like the rest of us. We need as many free to act as possible. Who else can operate these things? Jankovic and Park won't be able to run more than 2 or 3 at a time. Kayla volunteered. If those guys pass me the frequencies, I can handle a couple. Tasha said. Good. Now we're getting somewhere. I've run those trackers myself, and I'll have a go with whichever units we have left over. Dixon came back on. Fantastic. If we can keep those bloodhounds and MUNIS security off us, we can rig up a few surprises for them. Tasha responded, remember everyone, we don't want to escalate more than necessary. We just want them to leave with a good mind, so they're not coming back. Then instructing her AI, she said, give me the latest surface layout for relay station number 2. Highlight my position, the habitat entrance, the escarpment, the positions of MUNIS tracking drones and security teams. Transmit schematic to Dixon, Park, Jankovic, Winthrop, and Brandon Olson. Add the positions of all those not yet detained. Add Star Olympus drone positions when available. Maintain updates. Young Mr. Saffer had no clue Tasha could assemble an order of battle right under his nose, or even that there was such a thing. In his zeal, he'd overridden nearly every suggestion made by Lieutenant Taylor and the security team. Tasha just smiled at him as he walked past. It made Thomas distinctly uncomfortable, but he didn't know why. Taylor caught her smile, but only smiled back. He was experienced enough to read Nagorski far better than any wet behind the ears bureaucrat. He'd already learned not to underestimate this woman. Jankovic soon transferred control of 2 survey drones to Kayla and 2 cargo drones to Tasha. He ran another 2 cargo drones himself. Tasha said, Dixon, Tasha here. If you can, get your guys under anything metallic that will dampen down your IR signature. It won't mask you entirely, but will help. Dixon replied, got it. There's some metal sheeting we can use. One of those trackers just flew by 40 yards out from us. She replied, okay, I have everyone on the station schematic. I'm linking you all so we have a common reference. I see the drone you mentioned. Are there any tarps available near you, Dixon? Dixon replied, yes, there are dust traps over some of the equipment here. Do you have something in mind? Tasha paused briefly as one of the security team passed by, not wanting him to see her speaking. Yes, take one of those covers off and toss it outside the tent, but stretch out 2 adjacent ends. Can you do that? One of Dixon's crew said, got it, ma'am. Then he and another crawled out with the tarp and positioned it. Tasha called back, I see it, guys. Perfect. Thank you. Jankovic, Tasha, and Kayla flew their drones low and slow, weaving between tents and outbuildings to avoid both trackers and human security teams. Kayla spied a MUNIS tracker almost immediately above one of her drones. Quickly, she moved hers out from cover as it approached. Sensing the motion of Kayla's machine, the MUNIS tracker swooped closer, but when it came within range, Kayla flipped hers upside down to concentrate her own LiDAR beams directly into the receiver of the curious robot. With primary hunting sensors burned out, the drone behaved erratically. It moved this way and that, trying to acquire a target. "One down!" shouted Kayla excitedly. "Way to go, Kayla," said Tasha, as she maneuvered her two drones closer to the loose tarp. She positioned each cargo drone near the cover within reach of the pickup claws underneath used for almost any kind of payload. Grasping two corners of the dust cover, Tasha increased altitude as rapidly as possible. Aloud, she talked her way through the problem. "Okay, okay. I think we're high enough, and those things are looking down, not up." Moving the drones to stretch the tarp as wide as possible, she set her sights on the closest target. Locking the paths of her drones relative to each other, she drove them as one unit. Jankovic said, "Good, Tasha. I see what you're doing. Keep it within the reticles." As cargo carriers, Tasha's drones had a good bit more power than the tracker and soon enveloped it, forcing it to the ground. Tasha said, "Two down." To make sure, she freed one of her drones to pick up a rock. Aiming for the lump under the tarp, she said, "Bombs away." Back in the APC, another video feed went dark with no clue as to what just happened. Having just recalibrated all the drones, the sergeant then moved one to higher altitude. Tasha's AI interrupted. "There's been a marked surveillance flight pattern change," Tasha said. "Thanks," as if the computer comprehended her gratitude. "We have to step it up, guys. They'll be onto us pretty quick." Jankovic flew one of his drones near the tent where Dixon and his people were holed up. A security unit was approaching rapidly. As the cargo drone quickly gained altitude, back in the APC, the sergeant noticed a thin wire, but didn't register. He sent the tracker to follow this drone into the Martian sky, getting more crimson with dust. As it neared the cargo carrier, so did the payload below get closer to the tracker. Tasha could hear Dixon saying, "Steady, steady. Don't go too soon, Jankovic." Both drones were moving vertically, but also laterally, toward Natasha and Kayla's captors. The Martian atmosphere is far too thin to register a concussion, but the sudden flash of light made Safford, Taylor, and his team look up simultaneously. Part of a propeller dropped 10 feet from Thomas, and Tasha could see the look of fear on his face. Two security men ran out to examine the debris falling behind the nearest tent, while Taylor and the rest took up a defensive posture. Thomas silently turned and glared at Tasha. She only smiled and said, "It must have been defective. You really should have your equipment checked more often. Brandon and I aren't there to fix things for you anymore." Her heads-up display showed a message from Dixon informing her that they had plenty of seismic test charges. Kayla was still working on her drones, well aware they had been discovered. She had moved hers to higher ground, but only 20 or 30 feet above the tents. Each one was following a tracker with a crude flight path she came up with on the spot. On the text link they shared, she noticed a message from Brandon. "On our way. ETA less than 1 minute. Olson out." She didn't know what that could mean, so proceeded with her own plan. Tasha watched the overall display and had a good idea what Kayla was up to. Then it happened. "Good, Kayla." Just as she said this, Kayla's drones each made a beeline for its target, taking them both out in mid-air collisions any kamikaze pilot would be proud of. The two security men hadn't returned, which had Taylor agitated. "Mr. Safford, we don't know how many colonists are out here. I need to regroup to make sure we're all accounted for." Thomas said, "Fine, fine. Let's get everyone together. Maybe over by the topside habitat entrance. I'll leave that up to you." Out of the corner of her eye, Tasha could make out maglev vehicles on the horizon, traveling at high speed from the upper slope. She hoped their new friends wouldn't notice immediately. Tasha said, "Brandon, I see you. We've taken out 4 tracker drones, but there are still 2 in the air. Be careful. Cryptically, Brandon replied, That's okay, Tash. I don't think we'll be too worried about their drones. The heavy artillery is arriving. 2 of the remaining guards motioned Tasha and Kayla toward the habitat entrance. Privately, Tasha said, Kayla, let's head over them. I think we'd rather be in that group for the time being. The guards then headed off to look for their missing comrades. The maglev tracks were between the lava tube opening and the topside habitat, consisting of outbound and inbound lanes. Though each had a gauge twice as wide as a standard railroad track, they could also be ganged together for much larger payloads and/or dimensions. Brandon's small train rapidly came to a stop about 60 yards short of the station. Finally noticing, Thomas did a double take on the massive carriages. The 2 in the rear or closest to him, and the captives were large, multi-purpose flat cars. Ramps extended from the sides of each car, and construction vehicles descended to ground level. As they moved rapidly toward the habitat, Thomas yelled over the common channel, What's going on? I demand to know who is driving those vehicles. You are to surrender them immediately to the custody of MUNIS security. Texting Brandon, Tasha asked, Olson, just what do you have in mind? This situation is getting dangerous. He came back. Don't worry, Tash. We'll just ask them politely, yet firmly, to leave. At the same time, Taylor received messages from his now 4 missing men informing they'd been captured. They had no idea where they were, as there were covers over their helmets. Dixon texted Tasha that the prisoners had plenty of oxygen left and were safe and sound. His crew had quickly slipped them inside one of the airlocks. As he watched the heavy machinery rolling from the train heading across the igneous expanse, Taylor thought, This situation is rapidly getting out of control. It took several seconds for the security chief to comprehend what was happening. He said, Mr. Safford, it would be wise for us to withdraw at this time. Tasha could see Thomas wildly gesticulating. She said, Kayla, Thomas is getting himself all worked up. I don't know what it is, but I figure it has something to do with Brandon's crew. Just be ready. Kayla let Tasha's words sink in before saying, Oh, those are the heavy graders. They brought them back from the new terminal. And Safford were breathless as the machines made a beeline for the armored personnel carriers. A gunner and one of the APCs began firing at them, but the bullets deflected like fleas from an elephant's back. Taylor yelled, You guys need to button up your suits and get the hell out of there. The graders, each made for an APC with blades just above the ground. The graders slowed, then maneuvered about their respective targets. Driver and gunner in each had flung open the rear hatches to get as far away from their rides as possible. Brandon informed Tasha what they had in mind, so she went on the common channel. Mr. Safford, we know all too well how much you and your aunt value MUNIS equipment. These troop carriers are being used to bully those involved in a peaceful construction project, which has nothing to do with you or MUNIS. You now have an opportunity to withdraw your people and leave us to our business. Tasha and her crews only heard contempt in Thomas' voice. As I've said, new life forms, as well as this project of yours, must be for the benefit of your fellow human beings. You're taking far too much on yourselves, and we're here to make things right, Tasha only said. Thomas, you just don't get it, do you? Brandon, go ahead. Do what you have to do. At that, each grader moved up to an empty troop carrier. They began pushing them across the gentle slope of the volcano. Brandon said, I always wondered how tough these APCs really were. Sparks were flying as the troop carrier treads scraped over the hard basalt surface. The blades and grinders of the heavy graders were made to cut through this material to form roadbeds for the maglev right-of-ways. Taylor said, Safford, you better make a decision before those APCs drop into the lava tube. Tasha couldn't tell if Safford was being stubborn or frozen by indecision. She sent Brandon a text, and the machine stopped 50 feet from the edge of the sinkhole. Tasha repeated, Thomas, you need to stop this now and leave. You have to understand that you are the aggressor here. There followed an uncomfortable silence. Brandon knew not to wait too long, which could indicate hesitation on the part of Tasha or himself. After a minute, each of the graders pushed under their targets, lifting up one side, then flipping them over. The vehicles were heavy, with a low center of gravity. There was no way to right them again without service vehicles. Within Thomas' hearing, Tasha said, Okay, guys, their ship has been located south of here at approximately 850 yards. A look of horror came over Safford's face as the two graders turned and accelerated due south. Taylor began calling his people against Safford's protests. Taylor, if you want your job, you need to keep this area secure. He was in a precarious position, and he knew it, but he hated looking weak. Calmly, Tasha said, Thomas, I know the workings of MUNIS as well or better than you do. I don't think security is motivated to do this. Even if they were, frankly, you don't have the manpower to control the station and take us on at the same time. As if on cue, Taylor began getting reports of disturbances in the MUNIS compound. Station security was quickly being overwhelmed by airlock alarms, power blackouts, brownouts, reports of theft or fights breaking out far above the normal incidents. Tasha continued, Your actions here have no validity whatsoever. For that, there are declarations on the behalf of MUNIS and the Earth governments. Then again, we all know what those are worth. Again, Tasha broadcast the entire exchange to the new settlements. Many there tuned in to the action as it streamed over local media outlets. Dr. Colleen Safford frantically tried to raise her nephew, who ignored her. Finally, she contacted Lieutenant Taylor, telling him to withdraw. Without letting Thomas know, he texted his troops, ordering their recall. Thomas could see security personnel emerging and assembling in their vicinity. Taylor, what are you doing? I'm in command here, and I'm telling you to lock down this facility. Tasha had surmised what was happening. Thomas had lost this round. He just didn't know it yet. She texted Dixon, You can release those prisoners. Keep their weapons, just in case, but send them out where the others are forming up. Ignoring Safford and pointing toward the gathering security teams, Tasha addressed Lieutenant Taylor. Shall we take this to mean you and your people will be leaving soon? Taylor responded, Yes, ma'am. It appears that we're done here. Thank you for releasing my people. Despite additional protests from Thomas, Taylor said, Okay, boys and girls, let's return to the ship. We have plenty to occupy us back at the ranch. As the lieutenant fell in with the rest, Thomas had no choice. He threw up his hands in exasperation and followed. As a parting comment, he said, This isn't over by a long shot, Nagorski. Confident they were really going, Tasha texted Brandon, Hold steady and wait until they're off the ground. Tasha then contacted Riley back at MUNIS. Okay, Susan, you guys can start turning the lights back on. They're gone now, and we owe you one. She responded, Got it. And any time you need to make one or both of the Saffords look ridiculous, don't hesitate to ask. Then again, they don't need much help. Call me or let's get together when things calm down. Though she knew censorship wouldn't hold, Dr. Safford kept tight control over communications at the station. She had to maintain a narrative despite Thomas going off half-cocked. He could be dealt with later. After his aborted efforts, she and the Earth interests would need a new strategy. She would arrange her own press conference before Thomas could appear to screw that up too. Reporters friendly to the establishment were informed just to make sure. Several pet journalists were in residence. Mars was a hardship post by and large. Only the cub science reporters from the mainstream outlets maintained a full-time presence, but they would add political commentary from their masters. A press conference was called to accommodate reporters and any curious station personnel. The operations committee conference room was quickly readied. This message was for locals. Earth and her propaganda efforts were beginning to bear fruit. To be on the safe side, she had Thomas barred from the event if by chance he returned too soon. Chapter 12. Who are you going to believe? The first question was right down the chairman's alley. Dr. Safford, Jeff Priestley here, New York Times. What is happening on Olympus Mons, and do you have it under control? She responded, As you know, we have a very delicate situation here. A fragile ecosystem is at stake and the danger of further damage as this rogue operation continues. Though we've had setbacks today, I feel caution is the best way to proceed. There's no telling the potential harm those colonists could do. Next, a petite woman in stylish green coveralls and matching earrings raised her hand. Talia Santini, reporter. Ma'am, do you have any indication regarding the state of that cavern? Are these unique life forms in any real danger? The chairman responded, That's just it. We were attempting to ascertain the status and health of this delicate environment when our efforts were rebuffed by the colonists. Evidently, their priorities focus more on profits than the preservation of indigenous life, no matter how spectacular. I'm calling for an emergency meeting of the UN and a coordinated response from all scientists. Recognizing one of her reporters, Dr. Safford selected a man in the rear dressed in a suit more commonly worn on Earth. Abdou Diallo, West Africa crier. Given the history of conflict between two Martian settlements, do you feel these matters can be resolved without further escalation? How can the colonists be persuaded to see things from Earth's perspective? Dr. Safford responded, I'm so glad you asked that question. In a way, I see this not as a cause for widening the schism, but as a way of uniting the colonists with Earth's interests and goals. Our foothold on Mars is quite new. We stem from the same origins. Should we not combine our exploration and talents in the interests of future generations? This is an excellent opportunity for us to bury our differences and pull together. We must do this to create a whole greater than the sum of its parts. As Brandon watched the circus with Tasha, he could almost feel the heat coming off of her as she seethed. Calm down there, girl. You're going to give yourself an aneurysm, and that won't do any of us any good, least of all you. She said, You're right, Brandon. But you see what she's trying to do here? She has to come off like little Mary's sunshine, making Thomas' most recent stunt out to be a noble act while painting us as the villains. But that's nothing new. I'm sure Nofe and the board aren't liking this any better than we are. Consulting with the Nofe in less than an hour, Tasha had drafted a responding statement on behalf of Star Olympus and the residents of the frontier. Nofe made sure reporters in the new settlements would be listening. She began, Good evening to the people of Mars and to all on Earth or Luna receiving this message. In spite of what you're hearing today via MUNIS, we wish to set the record straight regarding recent events on Olympus Mons. By now, the bulk of records have been released by Star Olympus to various press outlets, both free and controlled. As the broadcast logs show, naked aggression was employed to intimidate peaceful people working for constructive purposes. By now, most of you are aware that Star Olympus is constructing electromagnetic mass drivers for launching human passengers and bulk cargo into orbit. Various Earth entities have made multiple attempts to achieve this very goal. It is possible we too could fail in our efforts, but we remain confident. Why? Because to date, we have built a large portion of the necessary infrastructure. In addition, we have substantial financial and technical reserves, a talented, dedicated team. In these images, you'll see armed MUNIS security teams operating well outside of self-professed boundaries and authority. Guns are pointed at Star Olympus personnel while herding them into detention areas. Constitutes assault. The leader of this expedition appears to have been one Thomas Safford. Was he acting on his own or at the behest of his aunt, Dr. Colleen Safford, or darker entities from Earth? That is yet to be determined. The scant claims made against the Artemis Accords or the usual or all mankind tropes were offered. As most people paying attention on Earth or Mars understand, these hollow edicts have no weight on the frontier. There may be a substantial majority on Earth who believe any claim to authority given by a government official, but to the free people on Mars, Luna, or the floating autonomous cities, this is vox et praeterea nihil, or voice and nothing more. Cutting to the chase, I'll tell you what this is really about. The study of new and fascinating life forms is merely a pretext for entities on Earth to push us out of the way. They need to paint us as greedy, uncaring miners and traders. This strategy is as old as time. The Phoenicians, who bettered themselves through mastery of the sea and trading networks, were anathema to the Greeks and Romans, advancing by violence and plunder. We do not align ourselves with modern arbitrary powers wishing to displace or co-opt us. In the old American West, there were efficient means of dealing with claim jumping. That's what Mr. Safford and his masters are engaged in. I remind you of the fate of such people in the Old West. As the record demonstrates, we took measures deemed necessary to stave off these unwarranted attacks and claims. Thankfully, there's been no death or injury, and the aggressors were driven back. The frontier has very capable people, engineers, scientists, educators, and businessmen. After bungling the discovery of life on Mars from day one, NASA and the space agencies have lagged far behind our own frontier scholars and those not motivated by their next government grant. By far, it has been the frontier making the most significant discoveries of microbial life, minerals, water, and habitable zones. We don't need the help of those whose enlightenment is based solely on their CVs. Out here, we trust only merit. Dr. Safford refers to us as colonists. We are not colonists, but Martians. This is our home. When politicians speak of colonists, they picture expendable pioneer fodder risking their lives to carve out a place in the wilderness, only to be annexed by the privileged. Let me make this clear. We're working for ourselves, not for them. The frontier is not interested in assimilation by incompetent, brutal tax farmers or mercantilists. Debates among pundits, parliaments, or politburos raged, but Star Olympus moved on with the work at hand. Tasha said, Brandon, neither Inoue nor anyone else has discussed possible reprisals. Do you think we need contingency plans? You know how these people are. They have to save face for one thing, and they have a lot of resources to command. He replied, I see where you're coming from. I know you don't watch the so-called news, but there are noises about increased public-private ventures for Mars. You can interpret that any way you like. Tasha responded, true. Sometimes what we hear is total disinformation, and other times they say precisely what they're planning. The trick is knowing which is which. Brandon then asked, so how about your projects? Are they coming along as planned? Twisting her long blonde hair, Tasha looked up at the ceiling, then said, oh, you could say that. I mean, everything is on schedule. But you know me, I always want to push things. I'm also overseeing the research, or at least coordinating the research teams as they come in to study the cavern. They're making new discoveries nearly every week. The tricky part will be what new science is announced and when. That's only going to stir the pot as people clamor to get on the exobiology gravy train. You wouldn't believe how many emails and research proposals I'm getting from Oxford, Stanford, Cambridge, etc., all telling me what I should do and how I should do it. I'm putting together a board of trusted academics to help me sort them. If we expressly exclude all those places, we'll really catch hell. Still, I want to make sure only qualified people get in, regardless of where they come from. They also can't be working from any government or crony corporate grants. That won't weed out all of the moles, but should keep academic fraud to a minimum. Coordinating these studies is exciting and helps to keep me going, though I'm certainly not bored with the other work. I have a good feeling about this project. I've never worked with a higher grade of professionals all around. Tasha asked, "What about your end, Brandon? I see the track sections are making good progress in all directions and they're on schedule." Olson answered, "You could say that. So far, I'm happy with what my crews are doing. Thanks to you, we're getting each bit powered up with a minimal level of glitches. Skarsgård is happy with the progress on the upper levels of the ramp. They've already moved pieces of their prototype sleds up there for assembly. He wants to be ready as soon as we're finished. Not to dwell on how this conversation started, but I can hear those wheels turning in your head. The look on your face tells me you're still uneasy." She replied, "You do know me well, Brandon. It's precisely when things are going this smoothly that I'm the most nervous. I have to go with the instincts that have saved my bacon so many times." Brandon said, "I can tell you're bothered by something more than the predictable behavior of these idiots, Tash." For a brief moment, Olson caught the added moisture in Tash's eyes. She usually presented a tough, sarcastic, or playful exterior, but her friends could find cracks in the armor. "You got me again, Brandon. You know, it wasn't easy for me to even get here, given the government constraints. They had to bypass a lot of their own rules regarding the fitness of people for space travel, let alone work on Mars or Luna. I've battled that narrow mindset most of my life. It just turned out they needed my particular skill set and couldn't find it anywhere else. I took advantage of their need while I had the chance." He reached out to grab Tasha's hand. "I've been working with you for so long. I just forgot what a struggle it's been. I guess it's because the issue rarely comes up. The artificial muscles do such a good job simulating or counteracting gravity that it never enters my mind. I know that makes me sound insensitive. It's just human nature that if you don't see a problem, then it doesn't exist." Tasha grasped his hand in return. "No need to apologize. I do the same to a great extent. Maybe I've been overcompensating all this time. I don't want to think about it, which is why I get so angry with those who limit themselves. Those with no disability shouldn't create one by stifling critical thinking skills. Self-imposed ignorance is the worst defect there is." "Brandon, I don't know if I'm trying to prove something to myself or to the detractors telling us the contributions of individuals or small entities don't count. Only the collective is capable of great things. Really, when you look at it, the collective largely holds back progress. There are so many examples in science, medicine, or politics where the consensus stubbornly held to archaic or fraudulent ideas that were wasteful or deadly. Trust the science, they say, when a large part of that time the science is utterly bogus. At the same time, the boat rockers or eccentrics are pilloried or ignored." Olson responded, "I can see then why this project means so much to you. You'd like to prove that both you and Star Olympus are capable of so much more than what the likes of Dr. Safford and her shot callers on Earth tell everyone." Tasha smiled. "I suppose that's true, but I realize that we're all motivated for our own reasons. You have yours, I have mine, Kalu and Skarsgård have theirs. It's not just about me, but in the long run, what we're doing will be taken for granted, just like we take computers or space travel for granted. That doesn't mean it's not important. What truly irritates me are people like Safford who watch what we do, assuming they can push their way in. Their motivation is not only to abscond with credit for our accomplishments, but the control and profits. They cynically preach to everyone about acting for all of humanity. The Secretary General of the UN, Zafri Rahman, responded to Dr. Safford, and they traded private messages almost daily, as she did with the directors of NASA, as she did with the directors for NASA, Dr. Carlos Garza, and the European Space Agency, Dr. Esmere Tiryaki. Not to be outdone, the Chinese announced their own mass driver project for the Red Planet. Tasha was back in the new settlement spending time with Riley as she usually did. At Mark Watney's, she laughed. Susan, you know I love the work out here, but it's nice to be back in civilization. At least I could get my nails done. I'm so tired. I'm so glad they took my advice on rotation. Not everyone on the board could see the burnout Brandon and I see. I was reading of how they rotated personnel for offshore oil rigs in the old days and managed to convince them. Our mobile habitats are nice and livable, but rather confining, Riley answered. It must depend on who you're confined with. You work with a much better class of people overall. Tasha responded, I don't think my coworkers are any better or worse than yours, but you know how people are. After a while, if they don't have good enough examples, then they develop bad habits or say, what the hell, and give up. Watching as the idiots get ahead, they'd rather they'll either mimic them or keep their heads down. Riley said, you want me and a few others to be your eyes and ears, right? I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm not getting much info these days. That doesn't mean there isn't anything there. Just that the usual leaks, intended or not, have dried up. There's an uneasy calm over the place. Tasha returned, well, even that's useful. Intuition tells me that no news is an indicator that something is going on behind the scenes. What about Cassini? Is it possible to milk him for any inside info? Susan came back. That guy is like the ultimate Star Olympus fanboy. His office is covered in press clippings, satellite images, and anything he gets his hands on linked to your project. He has to know something, but I doubt Safford would trust him with the really juicy stuff. He's said several positive things about the work, but that was early on. He's being more cautious these days. Come to think of it, there is one curious development. Maybe it means something. I really don't know. Knowing her friend often twigged on the most subtle observations, Tasha inquired. It might, and it might not. What sort of development? Susan replied, of course, you and Brandon remember how we engineers found very few challenges once we were recruited. Well, the projects in the pipeline haven't really increased in number or complexity. Why else would Cassini have so much time to drool over Star Olympus? So why are the recruiting calls to Earth increasing? There's not enough work, and if they bring in as many as I think they're planning to, there won't be any place to house them. It's going to be miserable for all of us being cramped up. Tasha smiled. You can bet that Dr. Safford, the department heads, and young Thomas won't be feeling any pain. But this could be something. Thanks for letting me know. Several weeks later, Tasha received a message from Drita Poloka at Milliken Station. Hello, Tasha. I think there's something going on you should know about. This could affect all of us on the frontier. Can we meet? How about the harsh mistress, say 8:30? Hearing the mild panic in her voice, she replied, okay, I have to head back to the work site first thing tomorrow, but I can make time. Later, Tasha had difficulty picking Poloka out of the crowd, but since she was getting better known from her press statements, Drita waved her to a booth she'd saved. Sit down, please, Tasha. You remember Stacy? Shaking Stacy's hand, she said, I do remember, though I haven't seen you since Hebescasma. Most of that time we were all in pressure suits. Stacy, a buxom and boisterous young woman with long curly black hair, said, That's right. You'd think after all this time they could come up with more stylish suits that didn't create havoc for our hair and makeup. I've ordered a pitcher of Opportunity Lager, so you'll have to help me drink it. Since Drita here got the place to stock raki, that's her usual poison. Then she winked. Keep an eye on her, though. When she gets agitated, she can overindulge, especially when I remind her that is the drink of Cretans. Drita protested. I do not. Well, maybe that one time. And it's the drink of Albanians, I'll have you know. Tasha liked these two and hoped to get to know them better, but they came here for a purpose. She said, I've tried it a few times. It has a hell of a kick, so I'll stick with the lager. Anyway, the vibe I got from your message, Drita, is that something unsettling is going on. You spent most of your lives here, so I trust your instincts. You must have your finger on the pulse of this place, being at the center of travel and commerce. Drita responded, That's just it. We can see all the comings and goings, and the comings have been ramping up dramatically over the last couple of months. They came through Milliken straight to MUNIS, though I don't know what they're all doing there. Now they're taking up residence in the new settlements and commuting for whatever purpose. The housing crisis is getting intense. If it weren't for Earth money being so useless, the rents would have skyrocketed long ago. If MUNIS starts paying in ingots or crypto, then we'll have a real problem. Tasha thought briefly before responding. They can't afford that. If they tried, they'd have to pay everyone at MUNIS the same way, or have a riot on their hands. There's already a thriving underground economy that's ignored, since without it, they couldn't keep that station running. If it were known they were paying in real money and government workers on Earth found out, then the unions would bring everything to a stop. Stacy said, Well, whatever is going on, it doesn't feel right. Most of them really don't have anything to do. They're spending more time here in the new settlements. Already they're commenting on the number of choices and the differences in lifestyle. But deep down, they don't really get the history of this place. Tasha then said, My friend, you remember Susan Riley, remarked not long ago on the same thing. She confirms there are no new projects nor facility build-outs. The last time I talked to her, she mentioned people were having to double or triple up in quarters. I should have paid more attention, but then I'm out on the volcano most of the time. Tasha spent the next couple of hours laughing and talking with Drita and Stacy. They told her of their adventures as they helped to thwart Senator/President Cho's attempt to forcibly establish Earth hegemony over the frontier. Tasha did know something of these events, but appreciated getting a first-hand perspective from the Martians. Tasha was an avid and careful reader of history, and their account shed needed light on the current circumstances. She mentioned, Have either of you ever heard of the phrase, a leopard never changes its spots? It might be difficult to understand the meaning growing up here. There aren't any leopards running around Mars. Drina responded, I know that phrase, and I'm pretty sure I understand it. Are you saying that Zafri Rahman and Dr. Savard are the leopards? Tasha smiled. That's it exactly. No doubt the Earth's overlords haven't been idle since our little dust-up on Olympus. Chapter 13, Divide and Conquer. Back on the mountain, after a regular project meeting with Enofe and Brandon, Tasha asked, Enofe, what's your take on so many new people showing up on Mars? I have an idea, but I'm still trying to piece it together. He reflected on this briefly before answering. Of course, the mainstream history books on Earth don't go into much detail on this practice, which is a time-honored strategy by those opposing autonomy, individual or national. Brandon said, That's pretty deep for me, Enofe. Can you dumb it down a little? What strategy are you referring to? Olson could tell that Tasha was working out something in her head. She then said, "We can pick any period in history, but let's start with the 21st century. Brandon, are you familiar with the Ireland 2040 project or the disastrous immigration waves or hidden policies of the EU?" Olson sighed. "Okay, Brainiac, that's equally obscure. What's it all about?" Brandon appreciated Tasha's sharp mind and patience for explaining almost anything while not talking down. She trained scores of engineers in practical matters of design or implementation. She said, "Basically, it is a program of replacement. The self-appointed elite wanted to flood Ireland with people fleeing the more overt tyrannies. So many are brainwashed to believe democracy or mob rule are essential for society. They figured on tipping the balance with useful idiots. They drum up phony popular appeal in order to push their agenda. Even when people aren't buying it, they push ahead. Ireland was sparsely populated with maybe 5 million people. They rejected entry into the European Union twice by vote, but their politicians signed them up regardless. In spite of fancy words about popular will, they played the long game. They opened the floodgates to those who would accept any conditions in order to move to Ireland. The United Kingdom voted to get out of the EU. A majority in the UK figured out they were sucked in by the boiling frog approach, a decades-long plan of disinformation and trickery. That referendum was also ignored. The German government opened the borders, admitting people who held a deep hatred for those giving them opportunity. Though some were just desperate to escape failed policies of their home countries. Many of those streaming in brought centuries-old blood feuds or medieval practices. And Ophi continued, "We could go back to the racial and genocidal practices of the Soviet Union, which deported populations wholesale, then imported ethnic Russians, to the Ukraine or Chechnya. The idea is if a large block of people support the overseers, then fear or momentum will carry the rest. As a black man, I take particular offense to any European or American using the color of people's skin as cover for a hidden agenda. First, it was to keep people out. Then came the reversal with a cynical branding of racism, public shaming or blackballing all those who oppose them, regardless of color, is right out of any cult operation manual. Fascist, sexist, or homophobe are also popular epithets. Even in Africa, many countries with a power agenda thought it best to clean house by pitting one ethnic group against another. They sent the most dissatisfied or troublesome to the Sahara or South Africa. Brandon could see it now. So, even though conditions on Earth have been improving for over a century, I mean, there's been no famine and everyone's standard of living is increasing, they're going to drum up more gloom and doom scenarios. All this to artificially increase migration to Mars with their unknowing shills. The new strategy is an old strategy. They didn't figure on a large population of free thinkers taking hold. Tasha responded, "You've hit the nail on the head, Brandon. Back when Elon Musk pushed for humans to be a multiplanetary species, there was no end to media talking about climate disaster, asteroids, nuclear wars, or pandemics. But that wasn't his agenda working. The crap put out for general consumption has always been there. Doomsday is a very useful tool for social engineering." Enofi then said, "So it appears we're in strong agreement, but what are we to do about it? This is a tricky problem. I don't know of a successful case for counteracting this divide and conquer strategy." Tasha thought for a few minutes while Enofi and Brandon talked some more on plans for track laying and testing the first orbital vehicles. She said, "Pardon me for interrupting, but how far have the tracks extended from the new settlements?" Enofe responded, "They're at least halfway to the North Rim. Why?" Tasha then followed, "That's far enough. And are you getting a lot of inquiries?" Kalu smiled. We sure are. Since we started building north, from day one, we've received proposals. After plans got out for the other end, it's been a steady stream from Mars, Earth, and Luna. Why do you ask? Tasha said, the problem is always centered on hearts and minds, right? Well, that and brute force. Part of a vicious circle. I say we educate the newcomers. Right now, they have no real stake in Mars, so why don't we give them one? Is there any reason some ventures can't get a head start? I mean, you've done most of the survey work. The Valles Marineris is a vast sedimentary deposit. There are resources near each Dodge city, and we have claims along the rights of way. The surrounding parcels must have similar deposits. Let's show the newcomers some real opportunity. I don't have a lot set aside, but I would throw in with a few partners to grubstake a worthy venture. We should review those proposals. We can strategically release some enticing survey findings to match them. Next, we figure out a way for companies or individuals to use the tracks earlier. It might be a hassle for Star Olympus in routing traffic, but could ensure our survival. Brandon said, Tasha, the way you think never ceases to amaze me. That idea has a lot of promise, but there's some due diligence required. We don't want the proverbial camel getting his nose under the tent. Tasha, I do love it, while keeping Brandon's warning in mind. I'll accelerate our sorting of the first proposals. Early success out there should bring us converts. Brandon, you can work out the traffic problems. You know where we have plans for spurs and sidings, but we'll need to start a few ahead of schedule. Thomas was spending more time with his aunt these days, despite involving MUNIS directly with Star Olympus and creating another interplanetary incident. Dr. Suzuki hadn't missed him terribly and didn't want to alienate Dr. Safford. He was still salivating over the career-changing opportunities in those newly discovered life forms. After her initial tirades, Dr. Safford felt confident she could spin events in her favor. Thomas had been too anxious to make points and claim all the glory for himself. She couldn't hold that against him, but he had to be controlled. She said, Thomas, you wouldn't believe the pressure I'm getting from Earth these days since your little stunt. But you may still put yourself to good use. Though you've blown your cover, you know people on the frontier. Keep your sources active for any information you can gather. Thomas had curtailed visits to the new settlements to keep a low profile. Among the suspicious natives, he offered, I do know that the Boring Company is a contractor for Star, with Skarsgård being the key liaison. Is that helpful? Dr. Safford mumbled to herself, Skarsgård, before asking her AI. Give me the background for Skarsgård Ole before arriving at MUNIS. In microseconds, the computer returned. Skarsgård Ole L., previously chief pilot, UN Earth Lunar, L2 Spaceport, previously senior pilot, Aristarchus Orbital Services, Oceanus Procularum, Luna, previously, aloud the chairman said. Aristarchus is one of only 3 rail launch facilities on the moon. It's the only one capable of launching passengers. Stop, said Dr. Safford, interrupting the computer. Half to herself and half to Thomas, she said, not much of a surprise. She quickly called up the latest images of Olympus Mons, sorting through to the caldera. The chairman now knew the terrain like the back of her hand. Zooming in on the western edge, she commented, this is the most recent progress. Now for some quick and dirty measurements. Thomas knew better than to interrupt her when she was like this, and for once he was interested in what she had to say. She sat back in her chair, upholstered in real leather. They must be close enough for testing, at least with cargo. The tracks are long enough for a 6G launch, and those tents could be for vehicle assembly. There are daily shipments by a combination of rail and surface vehicles with containers to accommodate the largest subassemblies. The chairman noticed an alert on a viewer marked red. Tommy, I need to take this call, so off you go. Sensing no additional info, he wasn't about to irritate his aunt more than usual. He had his orders, though he caught the name on the alert from Zafri Rahman. With your nephew out the door, Dr. Safford opened her latest message. The time stamp indicated top priority, slightly older than the 14 light minutes to Earth. To send a message to Mars, communications for most people would spend an hour or longer in a queue. There were alternatives to government-controlled deep space networks, but they were run by frontier entities. Dr. Safford opened the communique from the Secretary General, surprised to see him not in his usual impeccable dress, but in a robe, looking quite disheveled. Greetings, Dr. Safford. You must excuse my appearance at this hour. I'm sending this message from my residence in Kuala Lumpur as it relates to our Olympus Mons problem. Tomorrow, Security Council will announce our One System initiative. We're calling it an initiative when in fact it will be our underlying policy moving forward. I've only just been informed of this, which is why I'm giving you notice. You're at the sharp end of the spear in these matters, and we're relying on you to coordinate activities there. You've done a marvelous job accommodating the great influx of settlers we've been sending in the last several months. We hope that the added compensation for you and your top people have eased the pain. He smiled. We can't anticipate what resistance we'll get from the frontier, but it will not be insignificant. Those colonists have had over a century without control, and change will not come easy. For Earth, the stakes have gone up considerably. The one system policy, referring to the solar system, will be consistent with China's One Road Plan, which became our One World Plan. In light of events, we need to jump directly to one system. There will be additional funding for infrastructure on top of the already in the pipeline. I trust that Drs. Cassini, Suzuki, and Mr. Abernathy are still on board. The appropriate Earth and Luna contractors will be provided in a pool from which your people may choose. It is important that all of us are on the same page here, no? We have the same goal, furthering a prosperous human presence in the Sol system and beyond. Additional details are forthcoming. Ramen out. Though Tasha wasn't aware of the latest machinations of the UN or powerful Earth governments and corporations, she'd never been oblivious to them. This UN announcement was only par for the course. To Brandon, she said, I could have called this one months ago. Do they ever say anything new? The kinder, gentler approach might fool them on Earth, but won't work on the frontier. How are they going to scare people this time? Brandon smiled. Well, there's the tried and true. Those colonists don't know what they're doing, and we have to protect them from themselves tack. But I'm sure there are several we haven't thought of yet. Tasha adjusted the neck of her black woolen sweater. I'm sure we haven't, but fear is the most effective motivator. Critical thinking for the masses is the last thing they want. Changing the subject, Tasha remarked, I will say I'm happy with the progress of studies in the cavern. I've managed to pick and coordinate the various research teams such that their goals overlap without stepping on each other's toes. My aim is for no one group having a monopoly in any particular area to reduce bias in the results. Predominantly, we have groups from the private institutions, mostly Mars-based. There's a sprinkling of researchers currently not on government grants. Dr. Gritha Chabra from Van Leeuwen University has already determined the source of energy backed up by Stanford, There are hot spots under Olympus. They circulate warm water below the floor with small connecting fissures to the interior. It is warm enough to be liquid without the salt concentrations we see everywhere else. This cavern is well sealed and maintains higher partial pressure of oxygen, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, and water vapor than is possible on the surface. What's more, it is the organisms there that are responsible. It looks like they evolved to create something like a three-dimensional coral reef. It is the secretions and or skeletons of previous generations providing a gas-tight environment. It's like the self-healing concrete the Romans used. Maybe these organisms could be adapted to close off human habitats. Brandon replied, as was stated in an old science fiction movie, life will find a way. I never thought of how organisms might evolve in response to the planet itself dying. In terms of the atmosphere stripping away, Earth organisms evolved to build mud and stick houses or shells with crabs and octopuses claiming the discarded shelters. So why wouldn't plants and animals come up with a way to encapsulate the very medium in which they live? Only a week later, Brandon and Oli noted the increase of unwanted drone activity at their test site near the edge of the caldera. Brandon said, it looks like an old movie I saw about World War II and Operation Market Garden. Wave after wave of planes full of paratroopers in gear was sent to Holland. The sky was full of planes for several hours. Getting on the horn, he said, Tasha, Inofe, it's not just a handful of drones, but a steady stream. They're not single file either. I'm saying these are flights consisting of large autonomous swarms, close to 100 at a time. They're cruising all along the right-of-way from the assembly area to the lip of the caldera. We've been tracking them for the last 3 hours without let-up. It's like they're sent out for their maximum flight time versus power consumption before the next squadron relieves them. Nofi replied, all right, Brandon, for now, just log the activity as best you can. It's better that we have a record if things escalate, which they probably will. But we need to justify any action. Taking another sip of tea, Tasha said. I'd say I was shocked, but I'm not. I certainly hope the board saw this coming. I don't want to sound as melodramatic as the propaganda, but this is just the opening salvo. It's not only an assault on Star Olympus, but the entire frontier and our way of life. Inofe was deeply concerned. I understand completely, but how are we to respond? And more importantly, how are we to do so effectively in a short time? We released survey data and began discussions with the startups. They're enthusiastic, but they can only move so quickly. Financially and logistically, I'm open to suggestion. Tasha answered, I would advise giving the go-ahead for those projects you feel are the best prepared, even if they aren't fully financed or outfitted. Get them to organize a job fair in the new settlements. I'll make sure they know about it inside the confines of MUNIS. In the meantime, we can go to Van Leeuwen Corporation, Turtle Island, and leading players in the Earth-free cities. Like us, they'll see the writing on the wall, but can move quickly. In the meantime, we'll raise a stink about this drone invasion. Tasha did have ideas on her own to deal directly with this new threat. She told Brandon later, I didn't want to lay everything out for Inofe. It wasn't the right time, and I needed your input on some of the technology involved. We can't have our every move being watched by robots, especially now with a flood of money coming for a renewed infrastructure push. Competition is still competition. That's true now more than ever, Brandon agreed. I see your point, but you'll have to make a public case. That's part of the game, right? Tasha added honey to her tea. Some clever folks in the new settlements figured out how to cultivate bees in their underground gardens. Actually, they were essential for pollination since artificial means were not so successful. She said, oh, right, well, I released a statement an hour ago. You and Oli were out getting your test set up, so probably missed it. Laughing, she said, I don't think you hang on to my every word, but I value your criticism more than most. While I have you on the line, I should play it. I seem to be the spokesman for Star Olympus these days without knowing how I got there. Here goes. Tasha appeared in what had become her signature black sweater with her long blonde hair tied in a ponytail. To the people of Mars, Earth, and Luna, very recently the Star Olympus Company, currently constructing mass driver facilities on Olympus Mons, have been under intense surveillance. This is not the more passive imaging by one or two satellites, but by massive swarms of sophisticated drones. As you know, it is not easy for conventional aerodynamic flight in the ultra-thin atmosphere near the top of the volcano. We have concluded this to be an effort sponsored by a large corporation or government with the means for such sophisticated devices. Though most on Earth have long since given up on their right to privacy, or, to be kind, never knew such a thing existed, let us spell it out. Star Olympus is a private entity engaging in free and fair commerce. We have no agreements or allegiances to Earth governments or their pet corporations. Among our partners, the right to privacy is spelled out in detail. As with all individuals and entities on the frontier, we operate only through voluntary agreements. As all on the frontier do for the betterment of the community, we have adopted a non-aggression principle. For those on Earth, this is not pacifism. It is a way of living with no toleration for attacks or intimidation by others upon persons or property. Putting it bluntly, where this occurs, the aggressors will be dealt with. Our project, a peaceful one far out on Olympus Mons, is having no detrimental effect to anyone on Earth, Mars, or Luna. We only ask that we may continue our work in dignity and without interruption. The benefits will be appreciated by generations of Martians to come. Brandon listened closely, then asked, "You cleared this with the higher-ups before you sent it?" Tasha replied, "I did, though they had to hash it out for a few hours. I think they're realizing what they're up against. Maybe they always knew, but now it's here, front and center." Olson smiled and said, "You know this is an ultimatum, don't you? You pretty much told them to back off, or there would be consequences. Now there must be consequences." Tasha said, "That's pretty much it. I mean, I have an idea for the drones. Like I said, I'm sending you the current plan in this message. Take a day or so to check my designs and add whatever you think is needed. We can't wait too long to respond, or they won't think we're serious. Inofe is sending a cease and desist message to whomever it may concern, be it MUNIS, the UN, or anyone on Earth who could be responsible. In the meantime, you shouldn't hold up on testing, since that's part of our strategy too. MUNIS has messed around for 30 years without a concerted attempt to build a mass driver. Showing everyone it can be done only strengthens our case. By the way, how close are you to launching the first pods?" Brandon replied, "I'd say we're close. All the tests for the tracks are working flawlessly. We're still waiting for Skarsgård to give the go-ahead. We don't have a lot in terms of prototypes, so I'm sure that makes him nervous. He wants everything to be perfect, though I keep trying to convince him that's never going to happen. The stakes are so much higher now." Tasha cautioned, "I hope you've beefed up security on the ground like we discussed. I'm doing the same for all the power relay stations, and it's costing a fortune. We've ordered more robot security, but those have to come from Earth. That might not be a bad place to employ some of the newbies in the short term. It's better than having technicians doing double duty, and we could ease the best people in sooner." Chapter 14. Drone Fallout. There was no let-up to the drone invasion. After a while, people stopped looking up, since there was nothing to be done but keep the most sensitive equipment covered. Brandon finished his review of Tasha's plans. "They look sound to me, Tash. I added a few comments and suggestions, but everything should work as designed. Can you round up the supplies needed to build them in a reasonable amount of time?" Tasha answered, "You know me, Brandon. I'm not one to wait around. I've already got the basic parts, like the casings and coils done. to build a handful at least. The same goes for electronics. I left plenty of room for any modifications you might have come up with. My biggest question is how many devices are enough? There has to be a sufficient number to get the message across, but we don't have the time to build up a stockpile. Brandon said, well, we don't want to give the impression we're going to war, only that we're quite determined in defending our interests. We just want them to get off of our backs. Tasha responded, Brandon, you know that one or two actions on our part won't be magic bullets. Let's keep the big picture in mind. Go through your trusted contacts on Earth to gather what information you can. Get with members of your crew to do the same. We never know where useful nuggets might surface. As for countermeasures, I should have something ready for you in a few days. Inofe and the board have already given approval, though it's anyone's guess how defending ourselves will be spun. You and I are already outlaws by Safford's twisted logic, so she'll probably brand us now as terrorists. A day later, at the test site, Brandon asked Ole, are you sure you're ready to go? I don't want to be accused of artificially pushing the schedule, but the tracks have been tested every which way we can, without actually launching something. Skarsgård laughed. Am I getting a reputation as an old mother hen? I want this to be right, but to answer your question, we're good to go. We have 3 6G vehicles with dummy payloads. Both my crew and the Boring Company are ready. The drivers of the mysterious drones sensed changes on the mountain. Activity was increasingly weighted toward the test area. It was decided the first shot would take place in early evening to reduce visibility, though no one knew what sort of sensors they were outfitted with. Brandon observed from a bunker near the liftoff point, but in contact with Ole in another bunker at the beginning of the ramp. Skarsgård, all systems are in your hands. We have plenty of power and everything looks nominal. Start the countdown anytime you're ready. Ole responded, countdown beginning now. We're at T-minus 10 minutes. Tasha, Anofi, and every other employee was either watching the live feed or, if engaged in essential activities, listening intently. Anofi agreed with Tasha that a clear broadcast would be best, even if they failed. It was important that many newcomers understood progress wasn't always swift. Skarsgård's voice came over the feed. T-minus 30 seconds and counting. Nearly everyone on Mars was steeped in anticipation. Skarsgård continued. T-minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, and then 3, 2, 1. Switches engaged. Vehicle moving within limits. It was little time before the naked eye was incapable of tracking the motion. The viewer feed contained a schematic with inputs from vehicle and track telemetry indicating position. Skarsgård had dubbed this first vehicle the Prometheus, hoping it would live up to that grandiose name. Tasha watched the track diagram with fingers crossed. So far, there were green lights trailing a yellow dot indicating the combined Prometheus orbiter and ground vehicle. This meant the calculated velocities at each point were correct, and acceleration was increasing to 6G. If all went as designed, orbital velocity would be reached in less than a minute. For Tasha, all seemed frozen in time. Near the edge of the caldera, the indicators began flashing, alternately red and blue. Only those most directly connected with the test might understand what this meant. Skarsgård's voice came back. We have anomalous readings from the end of the track. Stand by. Brandon reported to Skarsgård. I'm not getting a location for the track vehicle, Ole. It doesn't look good. The end barrier appears to have been obliterated. Do you have telemetry on Prometheus? After some moments, Ole replied, unclear on that, Brandon. There's so much interference from our watchers overhead that it's difficult to determine right now. We're checking the downrange trackers at the moment. Away from the open channel, Brandon and his team began reviewing data from both the tracks and the orbiter carrier. One of his engineers said, "Mr. Olson, I'm sorry to tell you, but it looks like the carrier is at the bottom of the caldera. We do have some good news, though. She was light when she went over." Brandon replied, "Light? What do you mean, Jacobson?" He responded, "I mean the sensors indicate the total weight of the vehicle after launch point was light by the approximate mass of the Prometheus. She'd reached orbital velocity." Back at MUNIS, Cassini looked both worried and disappointed. As a dedicated engineer, not involved in politics, he genuinely wanted this venture to succeed. He was a realist, however. He knew what a monumental effort their project was, and not everything could or would go as planned. Dr. Safford, on the other hand, was ensconced in her office. She knew that if everything went south, she could not hide her schadenfreude. Her chuckles would be in poor taste, even among peers. As she poured a glass of champagne, she mumbled to herself, "If they screw this up, it gives me more time to put something together." The feed filled a gap with commentary and company animations of a working mass driver system. Skarsgård broke in. "We have confirmation. Prometheus is in orbit. I repeat, Prometheus is in orbit. Ion thrusters have stabilized her and are moving the craft toward final altitude and inclination." There were cheers and applause from the blockhouses at both ends of the track. Skarsgård began discussing with reporters what this capability could mean for Mars and the frontier. Brandon interrupted the festive mood, but only slightly. "I want to congratulate Mr. Skarsgård and his team on a remarkable achievement with regard to the orbiter. As folks may have noticed, however, we still have some serious glitches in the system. The launch cart did reach the correct velocity and did release the Prometheus at the correct time, but it appears the cart did not decelerate properly. It shot through the end of the barrier and out over the caldera. We'll continue collating our data in order to correct this problem." Tasha said to Adelphi, "I call this a good day. I'm sure Brandon will figure out what happened in short order. Now come the real fireworks." As if on cue, Brandon launched two of Tasha's devices into the Martian sky, with one going above and another below the unwelcome drone swarm. Each projectile disintegrated in a rather unremarkable explosion, well away from their targets. Approximately 6 seconds later, the first of the drones hit the red basalt slopes of Olympus Mons. The blades on some appeared to auto-rotate, but the thin atmosphere did little to slow them down. They rapidly decelerated at the surface in order of their previous altitudes. Brandon came back on the feed. "Star Olympus has chosen this time to deal with our unwanted guests. Please note the video insets." Cameras from autonomous work vehicles recorded the carnage. Every 30 or 40 yards, the view panned to the wreckage of a former surveillance drone. Brandon continued, "What you're seeing is the result of two devices launched to rid our skies of spies. Each bit of ordnance consisted of an explosively pumped flux compression generator, or FCG. In short, we fired electromagnetic pulse, or EMP charges, to simultaneously disrupt surveillance and avionics aboard these craft. If no further drones are sent, then no more will be destroyed." Though Kahlo knew the plan, he'd been cautious of such success. He burst into his spirited laugh and couldn't stop. "Tasha, that was wonderful. I know it's really going to hit the fan, as you say, but it was simply marvelous." Tasha, too, was laughing as she called Brandon. "Brandon, Tasha, how many of those devils did we take out?" He had just received the latest tally from Jacobson before answering. "At least one thing went right today. There's not a signal from any of them. It looks like 100%. It appears you're an ace several times over." Alone in his MUNIS office, Lieutenant Taylor cupped his hands over his face, letting out a loud moan. His AI prompted, "Lieutenant Taylor, could you please repeat your request?" At times like this, the security man wished the AI had some prominent feature he could discharge his weapon into. "It wasn't a request. Scratch that. How many surveillance drones are available for service? A female voice returned. As of this moment, there are 22 units in working order, with 3 in repair. With a heavy sigh, the cop muttered, Right, of course. Nagorski and Olson know more than anyone about their maintenance. That's barely enough for our own use. Safford will just have to find her own resources for this witch hunt. Ring her office for me, please. Pondering how to explain a fudge factor in a calculation for her next paper, Dr. Safford was interrupted by the security chief. Impatiently, she took the call. Yes, Lieutenant Taylor, what can I do for you? Taylor said, Ma'am, requirements for these special operations are cutting deep into our normal operations in both manpower and equipment. With all these new people, it's all we could do to manage our regular policing duties. They're not working. They're just drinking, getting into fights, and other mayhem. We can't worry about Olympus Mons and keep the newcomers from tearing up the place at the same time. Plus, in my professional opinion, the legality of surveillance on the frontier is pretty sketchy. I don't see how those colonists are any threat to MUNIS. As much as Safford wanted to show Taylor who was boss, she caught herself. Taylor was well represented as a sober professional and had his own support on Earth. Lieutenant Taylor, I understand your difficulties. We'll suspend involvement by your team with respect to the frontier, unless absolutely necessary. I'm expecting additional resources for your department in the next supply shipments, and will order more for the Venus Assist window. I'm approving all of the requisitions you've made up to date. I thank you for your invaluable service thus far, and will be relying on you in the future. Additional equipment will be arriving in the next few months, and I anticipate easing of the current problems we're having with the boredom of our new guests. Taylor had braced for a heated argument, but checked himself. In his time, he had worked for a lot of slippery bureaucrats, and Safford was at the extreme end. Keeping that in mind, he smiled and struck while the iron was hot. Very well, Dr. Safford. I'll add requisitions for replacing our surveillance drones, along with the APCs and spare parts. Wincing at this reminder of being bested by a frontiersman, Safford remained gracious as long as she had to. Very well, Lieutenant. I'm happy to take care of it for you. If there's anything else you need, please let me know before the Venus Assist window closes. I'll see what I can do. With that, the cop said, Will do, ma'am. And if you have information regarding these new settlers, please keep me informed. Goodbye. Chapter 15. Me Too. Dr. Colleen Safford waited as late as possible to inform staff of new developments. Only 2 weeks had passed since the flight of the Prometheus. The sting she felt had not worn off. Star Olympus cargo craft had successfully docked with a driver ship in orbit. The venture was off to a good start. She called Dr. Cassini in to break the latest news from Earth. In light of recent developments, Earth has pushed through a grand new project and appointed you as program manager. Having avoided the chairman for some time, Cassini cautiously asked, And what project is this? I've heard nothing through my superiors. Casting herself in the role of benefactor, the scientist smiled and said, You're to head up a new public-private partnership here on Mars. Why should those colonists hog all of the limelight or operate a monopoly? Where there's room for one mass driver operation, there's room for another. May the best one win. Dubious, the Italian engineer stated. We've started and stopped that project twice in the last 20 years. They're calling it Mars-Panama Canal without the follow-through. Besides, the Olympus Mons route has already been claimed. The chairman waved off past failures. I don't know all of the particulars. That's for you to work out. You can't say anything to your people as we're finalizing our claims through the frontier. If I had my way, we would have pushed through that requirement, but we're not in a position to do so. Cassini declined to comment and continued. The next best launch point is Arcia Mons. The elevation is lower by a few thousand meters, but still possible. She thought Cassini to be politically naive, but a top-notch engineer. Exactly. The plan is to travel along the westward floor of the Valles Marineris, then continue on up to the slope. The engineer added, running tracks along the valley floor for that distance is going to be rough. It's over 2,000 kilometers as the crow flies, and farther to the volcano. Dr. Safford sighed. The terrain will be challenging in places, but Star Olympus is over halfway across the widest point, north-south. Besides, Olympus Mons is much farther than Arcia Mons. It's almost 2,000 miles. I find it difficult to believe they've raised that much capital. And though we're taking the long route west, we suspect there are valuable alluvial deposits on the valley floor. At least this is what our partners are counting on to pay the development costs. We need to kickstart our local industries, or soon we'll be dependent on the frontier. They won't readily accept Earth currency, as you know. Once the workforce figures out there's money to be made in harvesting water and minerals, with the subsequent reprocessing, our tax base will expand. Cassini could not quell his excitement in finally getting a meaningful project, but still had doubts. Why was he hearing of this via Dr. Safford? What was her involvement going to be moving forward? He'd been in government for a few years now, and lucky to not have someone constantly looking over his shoulder. He had a bad feeling that's what Dr. Safford would be doing. He knew her pride had been wounded, and this project would be a big part of healing it. Cautiously, he asked, when do I get official notice through my department, a budget and specifications? The chairman sat back, glancing to her right through the window at a stark red outcrop 200 meters beyond. The announcement will be next Earth Monday at 10 a.m. in Brussels. You're to get a full briefing a few days before. That should bring you up to speed before any press interviews. The engineer replied, well, if there's nothing else, I have a number of tasks I can undertake on my own before I hear from Earth or inform my staff. In closing, Dr. Safford said, I'm giving you this information in confidence. Don't say anything to your staff or anyone until the UN makes it official. Halfway up Olympus Mons, Tasha muttered to herself, I'm sure this all looked great on the CAD system. The problem is, these contraptions aren't so easy to work on in a pressure suit. She was in the midst of debugging a new mobile thorium power plant when interrupted by an assistant. Ma'am, you might want to hear this latest briefing from the UN. She replied, well, I don't want to, but I know you wouldn't bother me out here if it wasn't important. Go ahead, Marcy, patch it through. On her helmet display ticker, Tasha read, the Honorable Mr. Zafri Rahman, Secretary General of the United Nations, announces the Mars Maglev mass driver, Ares launch. She tried not to be disgusted, but failed. No surprise there, she said, half to herself, though the link to Marcy was still open. There was still a buddy system for all pressure suit tasks. She said, they even got old Rahman out there to shill for them, though I'm sure his stock options are fully vested. The Secretary General addressed the UN Assembly, impeccably dressed as usual. Ladies and gentlemen, this is both a unique and momentous occasion for planet Earth and the colonization of our solar system. We as a species have met many difficult challenges in the past, and we don't shy away from them now. We're reaching out to explore new worlds. Already we have toeholds on Luna and Mars. This is just the beginning. The assembly rose in a standing ovation, not settling down for over a minute. Members of the assembly, please, please. Though our innermost planets are inhospitable, we're moving outward. Mars has much to offer, but there are resources available for all. Interplanetary travel is in its infancy, but will this technology provide for our future needs? We all know we could do more. Mars is both the stepping stone to the outer reaches and a resource for the inner planets. She is at the crossroads and thus a means to bolster ties across the entire Sol system. Even among diplomats, Raman was known as a windbag. Tasha asked, Marcy, when does he get to the meet? Shortly, her workmate came back. Oh, skip ahead about 15 minutes or so. Sorry. Tasha moved the cursor forward and listened a couple of times before letting it play. There was a map on the display, and the Secretary General's speech continued. From the MUNIS colony, we shall continue the maglev tracks started in previous years. Shipping will continue west through the Valles Marineris along Ias Chasma. The railway will exit from Noctis Labyrinthus, then on to Arcia Mons. Dr. Colleen Safford will be our Earth-Mars liaison, while our colleague at MUNIS, Dr. Franco Cassini, controls local engineering and construction. It wasn't long before there was an incoming signal from Brandon. He said, Tosh, did you catch? She interrupted. You mean the UN circus? Yeah, I got it. I guess they don't like being caught with their pants down. It's unfathomable how much money they've spent on Mars infrastructure projects over the last 20 or 30 years. No one knows what their money is worth, not even them. They just keep creating it out of thin air. Olson whistled. Ias Chasma. Do they have one clue what they're talking about? All I can see is a lot of people getting killed trying to level a road bed, Tasha replied. The powers that be are desperate to get up and running before we do. Then probably regulatory capture. They could lock out our customers claiming to have a viable alternative. The route Raman's talking about looks shorter on the map, but they're in for a surprise. Brandon said, they talk a big game, that's for sure, but Cassini is in charge. Given room to call the shots, he's extremely capable. At any rate, we've repaired and reinstalled the barrier for the launch sleds and found the bug preventing them from decelerating. In a couple of days, we'll do another test. Tasha responded, fantastic. And Elfie says he's been swamped with requests, asking when we'll be ready for customers. Liling tells me they're building out facilities and a hub at Milliken Station. They'll combine Earth and Mars components into subsystems for relaunch. With a pained expression, Brandon said, I know it shouldn't bother me, but there's already a subtle propaganda campaign going on. Mention of our test mishap plays over and over in social media. Naturally, much less is said of our reaching orbit successfully. Tasha smirked. I like that you're sensitive, Brandon, but no, you shouldn't pay so much attention to them. Success is the best revenge. We need to get these spurs operational for all the new ventures popping up. The sooner we're ready with the infrastructure, the better off we'll be on the public relations front. Hearts and minds, young man. Hearts and minds. 3 weeks later, Cassini opened a disturbing message from Dr. Safford. She's finally losing it, he thought to himself. Dr. Cassini, please contact me as soon as possible. Something's going on with Star Olympus that just doesn't make sense. Annoyed by disruptions in the first meaningful work he'd had in years, he caught her in her office, acting as her own receptionist. Hello, Dr. Safford. What seems to be the problem? She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Straightening some loose strands of hair, she asked, Dr. Cassini, could you please come to my office? I need your interpretation on this new construction in the valley. A few minutes later, Dr. Cassini appeared. Safford's assistant had already gone for the day, no doubt savoring her escape. What can I do for you, Dr. Safford? He said from the doorway. Please come into my office and close the door, would you? As instructed, the engineer came in and made his way to one of the chairs in front of her desk. The director instructed her AI, move the large viewer closer to the desk so Dr. Cassini and I can both see it. Wasting no time, Safford asked, are you up to date on these new doings out in the valley, Doctor? To this, Cassini had to admit, no, ma'am. I've been fully engrossed in design, logistics, and hiring for several weeks. It seems as if Safford were speaking to herself more than Cassini. Not waiting for an answer, she continued, do you see the spur lines here, here, and here? So far I count 5 branches, but there may be more. Each one shows both rail infrastructure and support equipment I haven't identified. The engineer took the controller handed to him by the director. He zoomed in and out to several of the spots she'd marked. You're right. No one would build those spurs without good reason. Infrastructure and habitat appears to be underground where possible. Otherwise, it is housed in these printed dome structures. I see 2 modular thorium reactors ready to be enclosed and some locomotive reactors for survey treks away from the main line. For what seemed like minutes, Safford stared at the screen. She appeared increasingly agitated. That much power, plus the habitat domes, are much more than they need to run the maglev lines. This looks like the beginning of new settlements. Can you possibly accelerate your schedule? Cassini now had a pained look. He wasn't ready for this kind of pressure so soon, though he should have anticipated it. With Dr. Safford in this state of mind, he chose his words carefully. We're working on the westward lines as fast as possible. There are bottlenecks where Earth supplies are concerned. Perhaps you could aid us in eliminating them. I have items with the longest lead times on order already. I would suggest going to the frontier contractors, but I believe they are working all out for Star Olympus. If you want to get in there, we need a hard currency they'll trade for. Today wasn't the day, thought Cassini. Survey crews were already running into problems in IS Casma. UN bureaucrats had chosen this route from their safe climate-controlled offices in New York. Safford interrupted his thoughts. Just tell me where the snags are if you think I can expedite anything. This project is more important every day. I know you're accustomed to the usual hurry up and wait, but we need to strike while the iron is hot. Don't worry about the project being tabled. I can assure you it will not be. Where are you in your hiring? As you may have realized, the new arrivals were brought here in anticipation of this need. The engineer had never run a project without red tape. The hiring is proceeding. Candidates were well screened before they arrived, at least for the management positions. They need to be in place as they'll hire their own teams. I hope the labor pool has enough of the people we need. Safford responded, That's difficult to say. Recruiters on Earth did the best with what was available. There's been a brain drain recently to the floating cities of Tangaroa and Nereus. Governments have cracked down on the exit visas, but they find a way out regardless. Cassini found this news disturbing, but with over 10 billion people and imagination lacking in government circles, the sad mercantile Earth policies could not retain them. Those with any get up and go generally got up and left. Cassini said, Doctore, if there is nothing else, I must return to my work. The only thing to add is perhaps Star Olympus has additional prospecting along those spur lines and have future plans for them. There's still many kilometers from the North Rim and thousands more to the volcano. After seeing Dr. Cassini out, Colleen Safford returned to the display, stewing over the likely proliferation of settlements in the Valles Marineris. There wasn't much to do before her nephew arrived. Thomas appeared saying, I got your message. What's going on? After showing Thomas the images with Cassini's interpretation, she said, What are you hearing in the new settlements? With Star Olympus in the open, there must be a lot of talk. Do you know what they're planning? Rarely hearing this tone from his aunt, Thomas fought a reflexive urge to give a flip answer. I've been spending a fair amount of time over there, but they're pretty tight-lipped. Of course, they're a private company with no government to report to, making it impossible to grease bureaucratic palms. Most new ventures have a good deal of security, but this is at a different level. This is the first I've heard of additional rail lines. With what you've told me, maybe I can pry some information. The director listened closely and said, Right. Well, we certainly haven't quelled their natural paranoia. We need to keep public utterances at a minimum. Butter up any possible sources and avoid provocative action for now. See what you can find out and keep me posted. Cassini has the bit in his teeth. He's working like a madman now that he has serious backing from on high. Let's not spook anyone. Thomas replied, Right, I'm on it. I will say that many of the new arrivals are getting anxious and low on funds. The more desperate ones could be recruited for a price. I know you don't trust me with money, but I know how to talk to the settlers. If you don't want to pay them through me, there are plenty of other ways. They're learning fast that barter is alive and well on Mars. The big payoffs are in platinum group metals, stocks, and crypto, but iron, aluminum, and copper have value. So do specialty items from Earth like Scotch whiskey, etc. I'll send you a list. Chapter 16 Martian Curveballs. Tasha, Brandon, Oli Skarsgård, and Inoue finally converged in the new settlements. The amenities of civilization were still sparse in the hinterlands, so they met up at Mark Watney's. They struggled to find a booth or a table where they could all fit. Finally, a spot at the end of one of the longer tables opened up. Brandon commented, How can it be this crowded on a Tuesday night? Inoue nodded. Yes, I know. There are a lot of new arrivals brought in by MUNIS. They don't have enough activities for them over there, let alone accommodations. Tasha added, I and several of my crew have hired extra security to keep our rooms safe. Several returned only to find someone squatting in their quarters. It's just like the UN, to come up with a project only to have someone else pay for it, one way or another. If this goes on much longer, it could get ugly. Inoue, when are you going to make the announcement? Brandon and I are nearly ready. Even with his booming voice, Inoue struggled to make himself heard. 2 days from now, we'll have our first wave, or at least 20 new companies looking to hire. On top of that, we have many angel investors and firms ready for new ventures. Our survey results will be released at a joint press conference. They understand what we're up against. Brandon added, Those scientists have been on Mars for almost 3 generations. They spent most of their time confined to MUNIS when they should have been out in the field. If people on Earth don't know what's available here, it's much to do with their foot dragging. Tasha said, I'm with you, Brandon, but it helps to stoke the fires when needed. Skarsgård informed the group. Facilities for building both cargo and passenger sleds are ramping up inside the boring company. Brandon may have told you that we're ready to pull the trigger. Are we releasing engineering specs for others to build compatible vehicles? Inoue replied, Of course, thank you for reminding me. Could you send me a package to include with our announcement? Tasha added, That enables many more ventures needing specialized rolling stock. Liling says they have a new project proposed by the Van Leeuwen Corporation, but she's offered no details. There are a lot of shippers in and out of Milliken Station who will have their own needs. Thomas Safford had remade himself in the new settlements. These newbies from Earth and Luna were an industry unto themselves. The UN supported them all with stipends, at least until they landed jobs with the Ares launch project. His girlfriend Gina had her own suspicions, asking, Tommy, are you going to the frontier again tonight? That's the 3rd time this week. Are you seeing one of those new women from Earth? Always full of secrets, he replied. Why don't you come with me? I'll take you out for a steak dinner, but I still have business to conduct. I've been on a fact-finding mission for Aunt Colleen. That's all I can tell you. Thomas no longer dodged roaming debt collectors as he paid them all off. He turned the tables and now employed them in his own ventures. Arriving in the business district, he said, Gina, the main shopping area is here. I have business for a couple of hours. I'll meet you at the intersection of the lava tubes down there at 7 p.m., okay? If you see something you like, text me and let me know. Gina gave him a piercing gaze before leaving the pod. She was very capable of taking care of herself, even if she'd made questionable choices in men. She wouldn't press him for the time being. At mid-afternoon, Mark Watney's had few customers. Pubs were mostly inhabited by restless new arrivals. One of these spotted him and waved him over. While motioning Safford toward his booth, he said, "Hello there. Are you Thomas? My name is Heinrich, and I hear you might be the man to see. Buy you a drink? What do you want?" Having been through this process many times, Thomas said, "I'll have a draft of opportunity lager then, thanks. What can I do for you?" Heinrich said, "I've noticed our money doesn't go a long way here on Mars, in terms of choices anyway. I'm told you're the man to see for an exchange." Thomas could now do these deals in his sleep, but responded, "Possibly, just what are you looking for?" Heinrich then told Thomas how he'd seen several supplies he needed, but that the shopkeepers would not take fiat money from Earth. "I need to exchange euros for something I can spend in the new settlements." Thomas informed his potential customer regarding exchange rates, time payments, and interest, etc. Heinrich's face took on a pained look as he said, "I don't know, man. Those are pretty stiff rates." Expecting such a response, Thomas sat back, replying, "Hey, pal, it's either me or one of the two Mars banks will do business with you. If you've heard of me, you know I have a number of clients. Perhaps there are other ways we could deal. Are you working on the Ares project? Better yet, do you know anything about Star Olympus? Information always has value." Thomas thought this newbie, like most on Earth, had little understanding of Martian political economy, such as it was. "I tell you what, why don't you think about it for a few days, then get back to me? If you can get closer to Star Olympus, perhaps I can give you more favorable terms. Regardless, you're going to need currency you could spend on the frontier at some point. Life on Mars could be a very Spartan existence otherwise." The two swapped e-cards and Heinrich left, lost in his own thoughts. The next day, a press conference was held by Star Olympus at the Hotel Bradbury. At one side of the stage were Brandon, Ollie, and Tasha, who said, "The turnout is amazing. There must be 300 people here. Most don't have time for things like this, or just listen on the comms." Ollie said, "It's not so surprising considering all the speculation on social media these days. The wild theories they come up with in the dark are pretty entertaining, though." Brandon added, "If you look, you'll see a lot of new faces, part of the flood, sponsored by the UN. They have a lot of free time since the hiring process for Ares launch is as Byzantine as they could possibly make it." Enofi Kalu proceeded on stage and stood behind the lectern. For some unknown reason, a large cheer went up from the crowd, even from the reporters. "Greetings, greetings, fellow Martians," he began. "As a representative of Star Olympus, I am pleased to stand before you today. We have exciting news. For many years, there has been a desire to relieve the bottleneck in getting both cargo and people to orbit. We've all known what the solution was, but until now, the proper resources had not been marshaled for turning viable magnetic levitation and propulsion into a reality. Luna has enjoyed this advantage for decades, and it only made sense to establish our own. Today, I declare the Star Olympus Railroad to the stars is now open." Once again, the crowd steered and stomped their feet in celebration. Then Enofe raised his hands in the air in a motion for quiet. "That's not the only good news I have for you. Our venture has done extensive surveys, both in finding a route across the Valles Marineris and ways to make it profitable, meaning opportunities not only benefit us, but many other Martians now and into the future. To that end, we have begun several spur lines in areas where valuable resources are found. This means water, minerals, and even aerothermal sites. We've shared our data with a number of startup ventures from the frontier. In the coming days, there will be a job fair held in this very hotel. If you would like to pitch your own ideas, we've included a number of angel investors." Despite his workload, Dr. Franco Cassini was in attendance. The opening of Star Olympus was not something he'd conceived happening for at least another Martian year. Until now, he was marginally confident his project, if not beating that timetable, would come closely enough in second to compete for market share. He listened to entrepreneurs for each of these new ventures, hoping to exploit the Star Olympus route, and noticed the rapt attention of new arrivals in the ballroom. Then came time for the reporters' questions. Mr. Kalu, Tess Baxter here, Twitter News. Now that your claims have become public, do you really feel you can make them pay? I'm talking about the lands along the right of way. Kalu thought briefly before responding. We've spent a lot of time in consideration of this question. We believe the areas have been subdivided in a way to satisfy the needs of individuals as well as industry. Of course, the free market will ultimately decide, but frontier land claims are rather precise in their terms. As with the Homestead Act in the American West, each parcel must pass a certain level of improvements for a claim to fully vest to the owner. The Martian landscape is far less forgiving than the plains of North America in the 19th century. Despite such hardships, we feel the availability of resources is not out of step for either individuals or companies to make such improvements. For individuals, we've added our own programs for making this transition easier. A number of power stations are required to operate the trains along the way. We've overbuilt those facilities to accommodate our own workers, with plenty of capacity left over for communities we hope to grow in those areas. Knowing how enticing this sounded, Dr. Cassini raised his hand, waving it to get more attention. Inofi did not recognize the engineer, but knew he was not a reporter. He pointed at him and said, You there, do you have a question? See, there is something I do not understand. My name is Dr. Franco Cassini. I am Director of Engineering at MUNIS. Inofi smiled. Well, my friend, do not be shy. What is your question? Straightening his tie, Cassini continued. I don't believe you have laid track all the way from here to Olympus Mons. Is there not a large gap between the North Rim and the volcano? Hearing this, a low murmur began among the reporters who did not have Cassini's access to UN satellite images. The Star Olympus spokesman responded, Yes, that is correct. Eventually we will run maglev for the entire route. In the meantime, we have facilities to offload between the current endpoint and the volcano. From there, we'll travel overland by caravan. We have a sufficient number of mobile nuclear plants available for that purpose. This may not be the best option for some, but our testing shows vibration or wear and tear to be minimal for most loads. In the beginning, our services will be available for cargo only. Before the end of the Martian year, we will open for passenger service. We felt this was the most prudent option due to increasing customer demand. As Inoue continued answering reporters' questions, Cassini silently rebuked himself for not anticipating this possibility. The pressure from Earth and Dr. Stafford would only get worse. Brandon said, Tasha, Dr. Cassini looks very troubled, doesn't he? She replied, Yes, he's not a happy camper. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes right now. We might as well prepare ourselves since Colleen could be on the warpath soon. As the conference wrapped up, representatives from startup ventures were quickly swamped by scores of interested newcomers. Dr. Franco Cassini was keen to notice this, as were Tasha, Brandon, and Ole. Brandon said, Well, folks, I'm going to take advantage of this brief respite and relax. What do you say, Ole? Are you up for some exercise, followed by a nutritious beer? Someone's opened a racquetball court in that new southeast tube section. This intrigued Ole. Racquetball in Mars gravity? That should be entertaining, if nothing else. Sure, Tasha said. You guys have fun. I'm meeting Gina to do some shopping. Once again, she's been abandoned by that ne'er-do-well Thomas. He spends a lot of time on the frontier these days, but always on a secret mission. Don't ask me why she puts up with it. I'll see you both for dinner. Gina was waiting at Thornhill Square, the intersection of the Pole and Clark tunnels. She tried to guess which of these gawking new arrivals might be the next Martian tycoon. Spying Tasha, she waved her over. I'm so glad you came. It's beginning to get a bit lonely these days. Thomas just drops me off for several hours while he does whatever he does. He tries to make up for it by buying me trinkets, but there's only so much shopping one can do. There's only so much space in those MUNIS quarters as it is. Besides, I don't want him to think he can just buy me off. As she liked Gina's company, Tasha refrained from commentary on Thomas' doings in her presence. It was better to listen and let her vent once in a while. While Thomas probed for any intelligence Gina gleaned from Tasha, she never brought him much. She figured Tasha would be expecting that anyway. Rather than ruin her acquaintance, she passed on only bits and pieces of that offered voluntarily. After a few hours of window shopping, she said, let's get something to eat. There's a new deli there in the next dugout. It was Tasha's turn to see what Gina knew. So what's the atmosphere like over in MUNIS? We're not hearing much these days. Are they hiring like crazy for Ares launch? Gina said, well, there was a fair amount of activity right up to that announcement of yours, so we'll see what happens. Unlike most of us, including you and Brandon, they had no transport clause in their contract. They aren't obligated to work for MUNIS or any of their subcontractors. The only stipulation is that their stipends will run out 8 months after their arrival. If they choose to leave, they have a free ticket home to Earth or Luna. This was something Tasha had not anticipated. It wasn't like Earth powers to allow opting out, she said. I guess I came at the wrong time. Then again, I wouldn't have this position if I weren't part of a big labor roundup. As Gina and Tasha were finishing their lunch, the deli was rattled with an intense shock. The sound of glassware and dishes shattering on the floor or on shelves was joined by the sound of fire alarms and leak detectors blaring. Tasha said, Gina, take my hand and come with me. We have to get to a shelter just in case. Gina looked petrified but complied as Tasha led her behind other customers to the rear of the deli. She explained, stores, public areas, and habitat sectors are equipped with panic rooms with self-contained life support systems in case of pressure loss. You see the flashing shelter sign? That's where we're going. Don't worry, everything will be fine. The chance of mass decompression is very unlikely. This is a precaution. Chapter 17, Skyfall. Once inside the shelter, Gina was shaking but began to calm down. Her grip on Tasha's hand loosened at least enough to let blood flow return to her fingers. What the hell was that? Said the frightened woman. She wasn't alone, as several of the shelter were new arrivals, all with the same confused expression. Tasha raised her voice. Okay, everyone, I think the worst is over. We just need to wait for security to give us all the clear after integrity checks in each tube section. That could take a couple of hours or as little as 30 minutes, so don't panic. No one has forgotten about us. What we likely felt is a meteor strike close by in the valley. For you newcomers, Mars is prone to meteor strikes. We have no atmosphere, so even the smaller ones will get through without burning or breaking up. These happen anywhere between 30 to 100 times each year somewhere on the planet. Naturally, these underground areas are less prone to direct damage, but we can still be shaken up. The owner of the deli finished tending a customer's minor cuts and bruises. He stood up and nodded to Tasha. She's absolutely right. There's nothing to worry about. Your devices should work for contacting friends and loved ones. Comm links between shelters should all be functioning as well, and to the outside. We have rations here, and if anyone would like water, coffee, or soft drinks, just let me know. Gina was already trying to contact Thomas. Tasha received a text from Brandon. We had a good-sized rock strike just west of the UN project. No one was hurt and no equipment damaged. Trust you are okay. Satellite shows a good-sized crater, maybe 75 meters at the widest. and a fair amount of water ice on the surface. She replied, Gina and I are okay. We're in the shelter next to the Seven Sisters Deli. Expect to be cleared in time for dinner as planned. With new information coming in, it was clear there were no casualties and no obvious structural damage in the new settlements. Tasha said, even after we're given the all clear, there will be folks doing more detailed inspection over the next few weeks. Planning for seismic events or meteor strikes have all been taken into account. At least that's true on the frontier for anyone who wants to be insured. Gina laughed. I'm all right, but I'm glad you were here with me. I think I'm over the initial panic. I feel stupid now. Tasha replied, please don't think I wasn't scared, and I'm still a little nervous. I felt a few of those before, but never one this close. Is Thomas okay? Thomas didn't give me much other than he's fine. In fact, he's happy now to have a captive audience for as long as we're stuck in the shelters. He's got some kind of side hustle he doesn't really talk about. If he has anything going for him, it's his ambition. Tasha flagged down the deli owner. I'd like to get a bottle of water. Gina, do you want anything? She replied, water for me too, please. The proprietor returned with 2 bottles. Complimentary, ladies. I wanted to thank you for explaining the situation to my customers. There are so many new people. I was worried about a general panic. The ones from MUNIS sort of know the drill. It's those who have never been off Earth who are feeling claustrophobic. We live in tunnels to protect us from vacuum, radiation, and meteors. It's boxes within boxes in an underground tube. Tasha smiled, replying, thank you. I guess it's my emergency response for training. If I can head off a panic, it generally saves a lot of work. The owner went to tend to other customers, and Gina looked pensive. I was feeling better, but his talk of claustrophobia made me feel uneasy again. Don't worry, it's not like before. I just never really thought about it in those terms. Even on Earth, I was never an outdoorsy kind of girl. But at least there was that option. Being a redhead, even the sun can be an enemy. What attracted you to this place? Tasha responded, I don't know if there was an attraction for me other than the challenge. I love my work and wanted to do it in a place where it would really be needed and appreciated. The confinement part never entered into it, since I thought of Mars being the ultimate adventure. As you know, Brandon and I didn't feel there were enough opportunities at MUNIS. I'm sure there were plenty, but they just weren't to our liking. I also wanted to get away from Earth, and MUNIS is still too much like Earth, mainly too crowded and regimented for me. Gina smiled. You are looking for adventure, aren't you? Maybe I was never the swashbuckling type, or too much of a scaredy cat. Have you always been such a thrill junkie? Tasha reflected. I can't say I love those adrenaline rushes, but they're necessary from time to time. They get me where I want to go. I didn't think to try the frontier until I'd experienced a few years at MUNIS. The frontier is not like Earth. Everyone here is looking for freedom above all else. Now I'm sure that's what I need as well. Taking another swallow of water, Gina asked, what do you mean? We're told on Earth at every turn just how free we are. There hasn't been a major war in over a century, and the minor ones don't last long. Tasha smiled. Why do you suppose they tell you so often how much freedom you have? Does the UN or any government have to remind you so you'll be forever grateful and obedient to them for providing it? If you were truly free, would there be such a consistent need for messaging? If you were truly free, wouldn't you know it deep down? Gina still looked perplexed. Why do you think we aren't free on Earth? Tasha smiled. If you think about it for a while, you're smart enough to perceive how many controls are put on you by governments and so-called society. You're told you have a say in the rules that govern your life, but do you really? By some divine miracle or by your consent, they claim, you've given over that power to some representative. Even if such people were representing you, do you have the power to choose them? Are they allowed to bargain personally For rights you will or will not obtain? Quickly checking her alerts, Tasha continued. Even if we're on the up and up, which is better for your interests, voting for a representative who might win or hiring one more to work for you full time? On the frontier, we employ our own representatives, agents, or services. If we aren't happy with their performance, we fire them. We're free to find someone who will work for us individually. There's no waiting for an election that may or may not go our way. Our representatives aren't trying to please millions of people or a few special interests, with you being just another number. Gina said, That's pretty heavy stuff. I never thought of it in those terms, since I couldn't imagine an alternative situation. It must be more of that propaganda. We're told the Mars frontier is like the old Wild West. There's no government, so no rules. I have to say, as I spend more and more time here, that can't be true. There's crime, but not like in the cities on Earth or the Luna government compounds. Until now, I didn't know it could work any other way. Tasha waved over the proprietor. Excuse me, sir, we might be here a while longer. Do you have anything we can snack on? He replied, Please call me Moshe. Of course, we have a lot of prepackaged items like crackers or chips. The engineer replied, How about a couple of bags of tortilla chips then, Moshe? The deli owner then raced off to take care of it. Continuing, Tasha said, That's a great example you just mentioned. Look at the courts in any country on earth. In most countries, for most crimes, you don't even see a flesh and blood judge or prosecutor. Everything is taken care of by clerks and computers. Even before the lower courts were automated, people were treated like numbers, more like livestock. The concept of innocent before proven guilty sounds nice. That's the way the U.S. Constitution and the mass media portray the system. The truth is that long before innocence or guilt are even determined, people are locked up and treated worse than animals. Speedy trials are also a farce. Some are in county lockups with hardcore criminals for a couple of years before seeing a judge. The media contributes to the feeling most have that anyone locked up is a criminal, not just down on their luck, mentally challenged, or being shaken down by the system. The proprietor returned with chips. Gina opened her bag and stared out into the room as she reached in. What you're saying makes so much sense now that I think about it. I guess until someone sees the dark underbelly of the system, they really don't know how horrible it is. Then again, there are so many ridiculous and intrusive rules we have to follow. We just figure it's better to go along while we brainwash ourselves. Tasha smiled. Well, that's the first step. You've opened your mind to new ideas, which are really very old. I know most people on Earth love to hear exaggerated stories from the frontier. They think it is too dangerous and wouldn't think of trading their so-called security for things that are far more valuable. It's not like people here don't know how hard life is on Mars. They know it better than anyone. They don't get to experience a warm day under a blue sky, feel the rain on their face, or wade through the surf on a beautiful beach. Those are things they've given up to experience something those on Earth or in compounds like MUNIS are missing. What they seek is a greater say in their own lives, the right to build and keep what they've created, and freedom from all the petty rules those representatives continuously write for their welfare. The all-clear lights above the shelter doors glowed green, and people were filing out. Gina said, Well, that shot down the afternoon. I need to make my way over to meet Thomas, assuming we're still having dinner here. Tasha replied, I need to do the same. It's not like rocks fall from space every day. So let's get together again. I'll let you know when I'm back through here, but I'm still spending a lot of time in the field. Once the rails are running, more or less, on schedule, then commuting will be easier. Gina hugged her and said, Great. I'll be thinking about what you said and have more questions for you next time. Take care. Making her way through the crowded tubes, Tasha noticed just how many new faces there were. Though a majority of Martians wore soft, robotic exoskeletal gear, she spied an unusual number who had not adopted this fashion. They must be fresh from Earth. They still had their native strength from walking and working in Earth's gravity. In time, they would opt for artificial muscles designed to work against their own to prevent tissue degradation in low gravity. Without resistive feedback, muscles atrophy and bones weaken. Tasha made her way to the intersection of Burroughs and Roddenberry to meet up for dinner. The Nostromo was a new restaurant they all wanted to try. Brandon and Ole were already out front. She said, "Well, you boys don't look any worse for wear. Brandon, you're an old frontier hand already." He replied, "I don't know about that, but hopefully I don't stand out like I used to." Ole said, "I could use a good dinner after the racquetball and all the excitement today." Brandon jibed, "You should reward yourself after that performance on the court this morning." Ole pretended he didn't hear the insult. Tasha said, "Okay, fellas, play nice now. We're semi-public figures after all. Let's not make a spectacle of ourselves." Brandon said, "We have another 45 minutes before our reservation. Enofi texted me and said he had some last-minute business, but we'll be here. You said this place has a lounge, right, Tash?" She replied, "You know me. I wouldn't pick a place that didn't. Maybe you two enjoy living rough out there on the volcano, but I'm ready for some civilized food and drink. There is a sign for the bar," Brandon said. "The Soylent Green Lounge? Are you kidding me?" Once the three were situated, Brandon said, "We saw young Mr. Safford from afar today. He was running to a shelter next to Mariner Water Services. He certainly keeps interesting company these days." Tasha asked, "What does that mean exactly? Gina told me he spends a lot of time on the frontier. He brings her over but doesn't really include her in his business. He spends a lot of time poking around, window shopping, and waiting for him." Ole took a swig of his ale and responded, "These were bruisers, all of them at well over 2 meters in build. Two were in his shadow, and we spotted another two, maybe three, we thought, were part of his entourage." Enofi spotted the group and walked over to take a seat. Brandon asked, "Enofi, we were discussing Thomas Safford. Do you have any new information? Ole and I saw him today with what looked like a couple of leg breakers." Taking his seat, Enofi gave a fake smile. "That does not surprise me. I'm hearing he has a new line of work. He's paid off all of his bookies since he's found something of a sure bet." Tasha asked, "So what, is he one of the bookies now? Like Earth Banks, they make money no matter what." Punching in his drink order, Enofi replied, "That's very close, Tasha. And our Mr. Safford has an eye for opportunity. With so many new arrivals on the UN payroll, he offers his services in the realm of currency exchange. For the time being, it is a lucrative endeavor. At least it will be until they engineer the next financial crisis. That, however, will only drive more customers into his lab." Tasha was curious. "Do you suppose he has connections at that level? Or is that what those toughs are for? Making sure he gets paid first?" Taking a sip of ale, Enofi replied, "I doubt if either he or his powerful aunt could claim that. The contracts these new arrivals have are pretty cushy. They have a generous cost of living allowance built in. Folks are well protected until they take a permanent job, but only for the next few months. With the rates he's charging, there's little difference between what he does and old-fashioned loan sharking. No doubt there's more than one frontier security firm looking into his dealings. If things get out of hand, that's another bit of Earth-Mars politics which could blow up for us." Chapter 18. The Labyrinth of Night. After their entrees arrived, Enofi asked Ole, "So when will we be ready for paying cargo? We need to advance our schedule if possible." Ole replied, "I've confirmed we'll be ready to accept shipments in the next 10 days. Customers are filing flight plans and have been taking delivery on vehicles for weeks. They're anxious to get moving." Tasha added, "As you know, we're overwhelmed with activity at each of the way stations. We've completed first stage infrastructure for Tombstone, Deadwood, and Sutter's Mill. Dodge City, until it is renamed, is almost ready for the first wave now that Water and soil processors are fully operational. Brandon added, the power stations have plenty of capacity for running rails and settlements for the time being. I hadn't planned on so many startup ventures initially, and Sutter's Mill could be a challenge. Even there, the miners will establish additional generators. They've already contracted with us to build more spur lines. Tasha said, I'm still uneasy with Dr. Safford and her Earth cronies. It looks like Cassini is making nominal progress on the western line. That meteor hit the eastern end of the Noctis Labyrinthus, revealing a good amount of water beneath the old glacier, not far from their right-of-way. Earth reports, such as they are, say there's enough for 1 million colonists. It helps when Mother Nature does their prospecting for you. Brandon asked, what else does that area have going for it, Tash? We know they've done no comprehensive prospecting. Is there anything of value? Tasha was examining a nail she chipped earlier. One of our satellites caught the impact. Spectroscopy shows heavy metals, mostly iron, but also some precious metals. It's not enough to go on. Once Sutter's Mill gets going, I expect most of the activity to be there, since the survey results are more concrete. Anofi added, that's why we're anxious to get the cargo vehicles moving. When they hit pay dirt, precious metal ingots will be shipped to Earth in trade for items we don't have on Mars. Some claims we've resold outright, but other areas are being leased to miners. We get a cut of the take to begin recouping our investment. Platinum, palladium, and other metals are getting expensive on Earth. 2 weeks later, the first customer, Ares Propellants, was ready to launch. Vehicles with tanks of methane and liquid oxygen were to link up with company ships in orbit. The CEO, Jiho Sun, was present in the observation tower at the top of Olympus Mons with Anofe, Tasha, Brandon, and Ole. Anofe asked, Mr. Sun, would you like a cup of tea? We still have a few minutes before getting underway. The executive, looking pensive, said, oh yes, please, that is very kind. Please excuse me if I appear to be distracted. I have a lot on my mind. You're sure you've rechecked everything? Ole interjected, sir, we've gone over all of our lists plus some additional items. We've launched 6 dummy payloads of maximum mass successfully, both solids and liquids. Confidence is high. Tasha and Brandon were making last-minute inquiries with flight operations. Tasha prodded her friend. You have been over every detail, haven't you? We have a lot of shareholders counting on us, as does Ares. He replied, you don't have to tell me. I haven't slept in almost 30 hours. Tasha announced, countdown to first payload launch is set for 10 minutes, everyone. Finally, the controller said, launch in T-minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage. Though there were video feeds everywhere, Tasha and Brandon watched through tracking binoculars as each sled accelerated to orbital velocity. Tasha exclaimed, Brandon, they're already a blur. He looked to the departure board as each designator lit up in green letters. Ares Propellants, Cargo 001, 002, 003, 004. Nominal trajectory verified. Brandon said in a low voice, Tasha, they're all away and look good for firing upper stage thrusters. We did it. She silently gripped his arm, not wanting to look too surprised and excited in front of their first customer. Anofe pointed the CEO to a larger viewer indicating camera views of Olympus Mons from each cargo carrier as it accelerated to orbit and rendezvous. Dr. Safford called Cassini into her office. Dr. Cassini, I'd like an informal briefing. Of course, I've read the official paperwork and heard your reports. However, sometimes there are issues we should address off the record. The chief engineer responded, agreed, but soon the cat will be out of the bag, as the Americans say. Even with our false starts, Star Olympus has stolen a march from us. Despite this great influx of newcomers, we're having difficulty hiring for this project. We're making progress for the time being, but the competition increases exponentially, the engineer continued. New entrepreneurial ventures are popping up along their line. What incentives can we offer to counter them? Dr. Safford was trying not to look glum. That's what I've been afraid of, Dr. Cassini. We need those folks working for us, not Star Olympus. I'll be adding a significant amount to your budget to finance additional surveys. Gather up some of the scientists here. Have them organize an expedition to that meteor impact site for a start. They've been bugging me, so we'll use it to our advantage. A good deal of excavation was done for us, so we shouldn't waste the opportunity. Dr. Cassini left somewhat happier about his budget, but noting once again how government was both proactive and reactive at all the wrong times. Dr. Safford's viewer alerted her to a new message from the Secretary General, Zafri Rahman. As if I'm not under enough pressure, she thought while pressing play. Dr. Safford, I trust you have recovered from the meteor strike. That's the closest any has come to MUNIS, is it not? Anyway, I'm sure you have things under control, and that is not the main point. My concern, among a number of interested parties on Earth, is the successful maiden launch by Star Olympus. This is seen as a real threat to the status quo, with little time to react. No one anticipated them running nuclear locomotives cross-country while their track laying continues. I hear there are several Frontier and Earth companies lining up in their queue. The General Assembly could forbid member nations from using those services or from transferring cargoes in orbit, but that would not be popular. The smaller spacefaring nations would cry foul, discrimination, and neo-mercantilism. All we can do is throw up bureaucratic barriers to slow things down. You know that can only last for so long if Star Olympus maintains safety and reliability, the Secretary General continued. By the way, I'm already hearing of key new recruits opting for Frontier employment over our subcontractors. We relaxed their contracts at your insistence. They're not locked in and are guaranteed a greatly reduced income tax for the first 10 years of employment by UN member companies. If defection gets to be a trend, then our plans for demographic turnover on the frontier are in jeopardy. Steps must be taken to retain these new arrivals in our camp. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly clear, Mr. Secretary, muttered the MUNIS director to herself. As much as she loved the perks of her position and higher ones she wished to obtain, Dr. Safford knew that success in politics rested on a knife edge. At any time and for any reason, that same knife could cut you to ribbons. She left a message for Dr. Cassini. Hello, Franco, I've changed my mind on that expedition. You have way too much on your plate, so I'm putting that on my task list, okay? I'm going to meet with Dr. Suzuki this afternoon. Buena giornata. Dr. Suzuki greeted his colleague with much apprehension. He never received a sincere apology for that stunt pulled by his subordinate, Thomas Safford. One he was not able to fire. Greetings, Dr. Safford. I was just making some tea. Would you like some? The director took a seat at his conference table. That would be lovely, yes. 2 sugars, please. I come with good news, Kaito. The scientist brought an antique Japanese tea service to the table and placed a cup before each of them. He said, I certainly hope so, Colleen. We've had only limited access to that cavern on Olympus Mons. We have to go through this Tasha Nagorski for every permission. They post robot guards with our teams to spy on us, and we're not allowed to take samples back to our own labs. We have to use their on-site facilities. Letting the man vent, the director collected herself. Yes, those frontier people can be tedious, especially Ms. Nagorski. But we may have received a gift from the heavens and the UN Science Council. How would you like to lead an expedition to the meteor crater? You've been telling us there are periodic plumes of CO2 and methane since the impact. Perhaps there is life underground in the Noctis Labyrinthus, and there you wouldn't have to deal with the provincials. Dr. Suzuki was still wary, but hopeful now. Smiling, he said, "Yes, it does look very promising. That country is quite rugged, though. We're going to need a good amount of special equipment. Of course, I've already had discussions with a number of other researchers here as to how we might go about it. Until now, those were purely hypothetical. Does this have full approval and funding?" The director sipped her tea, then answered, "Not as yet, but recent messages I'm getting from the Secretary General tell me there won't be a lot of red tape on this one. In addition to the scientific value, we need a solid public relations coup in light of events on the frontier. If you get me a preliminary budget by the end of the day, I'll put that through to the Secretary and the UN Science Council. The Secretary was most urgent in his last communication, so I'm offering this proposal as part of my response. I'm confident we'll have funding forthwith. After that, you'll have a free hand in your studies." Natasha and Brandon were having dinner in Dodge City when they were alerted to a news report concerning Ares' launch and MUNIS. Two people were standing in pressure suits. The Ares launch terminal was under construction behind them. A reporter said, "This is Anastasia Karpov with the Martian Chronicle. I'm here with Dr. Kaito Suzuki. His team is embarking on a scientific expedition to the site of the meteor strike in the Noctis Labyrinthus. Dr. Suzuki, you'll be entering extremely rough and unpredictable territory as yet unexplored from the ground. Are you sure your group is ready?" The scientist responded, "Yes, Anastasia, I believe we are. We have a fine team and the latest, most reliable equipment for such an excursion. We'll travel much of the way along the Ares launch maglev line, then go overland approximately 180 kilometers to the crater." The reporter was looking past him to the flatbed cars on the train. Then pointing, she asked, "Is that what you're referring to? These vehicles, they look like giant bugs." Brandon slammed his mug down on the table. "Those are our rigs. The supplier told me they were having parts issues and couldn't deliver. Wonder how much extra he got paid to divert our crawlers." The biologist in Dr. Suzuki could not help but to correct the reporter. "Not quite. You see, bugs or insects have only 6 legs. Each of these vehicles has 8, like a spider. Where we're going, standard rovers are not always reliable. These all have wheels, but also legs for traversing rugged, uneven terrain. We'll be dealing with a mixture of rocks, ice, and fine sand dunes out there, so we must be prepared. The 2 large machines you see behind the locomotive house the reactors. For the most part, we'll be powering the vehicles directly, connected by cable. That way the batteries for each vehicle will have maximum charge before separating. It will be like an old-fashioned caravan, but with mechanical spiders instead of camels." Tasha watched 2 of the smaller vehicles crawl exactly like spiders up and onto their respective cars. The center or body of each vehicle was black, and the long spindly legs were painted bright yellow. Covers were in place over the most vulnerable points to keep out the jagged, microscopic dust. Various sub-appendages were attached to different legs for drilling, scooping, atmospheric sampling, or other purposes. She said, "I know you, Brandon, and you don't buy off the rack. Where's the special equipment you asked for and probably designed yourself?" Brandon went to the wall viewer. He backed it up, then froze the frame. "See the front and rear of each rig? Spinnerets. They're winches with the latest and thinnest high-density cable. The ends can be fastened manually or to a harpoon or grappling hook delivery system. You see there and there are drills for pitons to anchor one or more legs or other equipment. Each spinneret and anchor can handle twice the Mars weight of the vehicle. There's more, but that's just a start." Tasha said, "Well, there's nothing we can do about it at this point. We just have to be more careful with our procurement." Dr. Suzuki continued, "We have enough provisions for 3 months, not including supplies, will cache along our route. We'll also have more space. Excursion vehicles can be very confining for a group of people, or at least they have in the past. Each crawler has 2 or 3 inflatable habitat or laboratory modules if we need them. The reporter then asked, "What do you expect to find out there, Doctor?" Suzuki paused, then answered, "Well, satellite data has identified water and possibly dry ice. There are hints of valuable metals and even sporadic bursts of methane. We'll know much more once we're there. So if you'll excuse me, I have last-minute preparations before we depart." The feed from the Martian Chronicle split into 2 screens. On the left was an elevated view from a flying drone of the train and all of the equipment now loaded. Crews in pressure suits tighten restraints for vehicles and supplies, while others enter airlocks in the passenger section. On the right, reporter Karpov remained outside as she wrapped up her coverage. The expedition to Noctis Labyrinthus is soon to embark on the largest scientific excursion by MUNIS in many years. Sources say the impetus comes from recent successes of the Star Olympus venture. Official word from the UN touts this as increasing cooperation by the nations of Earth through public-private partnerships. The colonization of Mars has been on the back burner for some time, and priorities are shifting once again. This is Anastasia Karpov for the Martian Chronicle, signing off. Chapter 19, Hearts, Minds, and Planets. Increasing pressure from Earth on Dr. Safford exacerbated the demands for Dr. Cassini to expedite his schedule. "Franco, you've been given more funds and more people. What else do you need to reduce the timeline?" The engineer was getting tired of these constant briefings, which also ate into his schedule. "First, I'm having difficulty bringing in people. Many are waiting for the last minute, but new positions on the frontier increase by the day. Another hiring fair is already underway. And I'll bring this up again, though it is a sore subject. That is the bottleneck for bringing in equipment and supplies. Our port and receiving facilities are running at 110%, so we've been using Millikan Station for overflow. They account for nearly a third of our needs, so you know what I'm going to ask for." The director was running out of excuses. "You want connecting rail lines between MUNIS, Ares Launch, and Millikan Station. You know how I feel about that." Cassini responded, "Yes, Doctor, I do. But it makes no sense compounding premium payment for supplies with the added cost of moving them less than 10 kilometers. Offloading the ships to ground vehicles, then back onto the rails also costs us time." "Millikan Station has already given the go-ahead," Dr. Safford replied. "Of course they have. They're ruthless opportunists waiting to take advantage of the situation. But I guess I have no choice. Go ahead and make the arrangements. I'll get legal to do what they can." At the job fair, Tasha and Brandon manned a booth for Star Olympus. Brandon said, "This feels weird. Aren't we competing against our own investors and partners?" Both were dressed more formally in business attire. Tasha was wearing a white blouse and navy blue skirt below the knee. For this afternoon, she would forego wearing anything but the minimum in soft robotics. Brandon shaved in a suit complete with resistive feedback. Tasha smiled. "You could say that, but I'm sure they'll agree that hiring with any of us is better than them being enticed by Ares Launch. Besides, we're offering placement services for any not wishing to stay on after the tracks are finished. You know something, though? From what I've seen, these newbies aren't really mingling with the frontier residents. They stick to themselves, so probably have a lot of preconceived notions." Tasha's meticulous planning placed the Star Olympus booth in a high-traffic area near the makeshift food court. She climbed onto the table, standing up to address the small crowd looking over their exhibits. Pointing to 2 young guys whose fashion choices screamed Earth, she asked, "You there, yes, you two. What would you say to never paying taxes again, no matter what you make?" This got their attention, and that of several others nearby. The taller, dark-haired man replied, "Are you serious? We'll always have death and taxes." Tasha replied, "Maybe someone on Earth will tell you that, but no one on the frontier is going to come looking for you. There's no government here, so no one is trying to wring you dry. That means no withholding, no income tax, sales tax, or property tax. If you want a product, you pay for it. If service is not up to snuff, you fire that entity and seek out another. If you want security, you contract for it. If you want arbitration, you pay for that. Food, water, power, medical are all here. All basic services can be found with plenty of competition, meaning high quality at lower cost." Another man in the growing crowd said, "We were told the frontier is full of con men and shady enterprises who prey on the weak. How do we know who is on the up and up?" Tasha offered a big smile and responded, "I'm sure you were told a lot of things, both on the way to Mars and at MUNIS. Well, how does your government protect you from people like that? When government gives you terrible service, what do? Do you sue them in one of their own courts? How can you get a fair shake when everyone in the halls of justice is paid with what they've already stolen from you? Why, when they aren't screwing you directly, do they not go after the worst offenders?" The man responded, "You have some good points there, but if there's no government, how do we defend our interests?" Tasha said, "I'm glad you asked that. As I said, you'll have already hired your own security with the power to investigate. If they're not doing the job, you fire them. You can hire your own prosecutor and go after anyone you believe has wronged you. They can't prosecute for frivolous reasons because if they did, they wouldn't stay in business. The defendant has a representative, and with the prosecutor, they hire arbitrators, our version of a judge, jury, and court. Would you rather have a say in how the most important decisions in your life are made, or trust in bureaucrats who treat you like a number and a nuisance?" A smart-dressed woman from the food court asked, "That's great, but what if the defendant doesn't have a lawyer?" Tasha answered, "It's a bit like uninsured drivers in the old days. The prosecutor pays for representation within limits. The defendant is given a choice of firms to represent him or her, if they wish, or represent themselves. You can also prosecute someone on your own. Pretty much everyone signs up since it is difficult to do business with people if you can't show them you're prepared. It's rather like being bonded. Talk to the old hands and find out how things work. Opportunities have opened up in conjunction with Star Olympus. New resources are being discovered continuously. There's plenty of action in mining and processing, but that leads to higher value products. Mars is primed to deliver for current markets, and several will invent. As with gold rushes in the past, someone must be there to sell picks, shovels, and Levi's, right? There are many companies here today, both new and the more established. We also have angel investors for those new enterprises. There are many companies here today, both new and the more established. We also have angel investors for those new enterprises. Buzz in the Bradbury ballroom noticeably increased as Tasha stepped down. Brandon said, "Well done, Nagorski. You've definitely lit a fire under this crowd." Tasha noticed several people contacting others on their devices, wondering why businesses here weren't emphasizing the frontier way of doing things. She said, "Brandon, maybe I just saw the light early. The old-timers are so used to doing things the frontier way, they've forgotten all those fees and regulations enslaving Earth." A voice in the crowd yelled, "Taxation is theft," which shortly caught on. Soon the room was filled with a chorus shouting, "No more taxes! No more taxes!" Tasha and Brandon were swamped with questions nonstop for the next several hours. Ole found them as the Mars job fair ended for the day. "You two look pretty wrecked. No offense. I mean, it looks like you've had a long day. Are you still up for dinner?" "I'll buy." Brandon smiled and said, "You'll get no argument from me. I could use a nice cold beer right now." Tasha said. We've got interns here to clean up and lock down the displays, so let's go. Out in front, waiting for their pod, Brandon said, See over there? It's Tom Safford, heading for that black stretch hover. He's got those same two goons with him, probably working the job fair, riding in that. He's making bank off the new arrivals. On the way to the restaurant, Tasha said, I just got a text from Lai Ling. It looks like they're linking Milliken Station with MUNIS. They're going with a full turnabout system for outgoing lines, Star Olympus, Ares launch, and the UN compounds. I wonder how that's going to work, Brandon replied. It'll make for interesting negotiations, I'm sure. For the time being, one thing is certain. Earth and Mars need each other, and we need some basic ground rules, something besides might makes right. Mars and our way of life is coming into its own, and the fixers on Earth are going to have to deal with it. The Red Cliff was an established Italian restaurant in one of the few domed sections of the new settlements. As the name indicated, there was a stunning sunset view of the southern rim of the Valles Marineris. Robot cooks were toiling away in the central kitchen on full display. One was spinning a large pizza crust. Another robot had just delivered a pitcher of beer. Pouring Ole a glass, Tasha asked, So what's the status on passenger service? Ole took a good sip and replied, I expect we'll move forward on that quickly now with our new arrangement. Brandon looked confused. What arrangement would that be? Ole was apologetic. Sorry, Brandon. You've been so busy this week, I didn't have a chance to tell you that we've worked a deal with my old employer, Aristarchus Orbital Services. I cleared it with Inoue and the board first. Tasha understood immediately. That's amazing, Ole. You mean they're willing to share their data? What's that going to cost? Brandon still wasn't sure what they were talking about. You mean access to their launch database, right? All that data can be used to train our AIs and get them in line much faster. I assume that's what you're saying. Ole responded, Exactly. And to answer Tasha's question, we paid them in shares, but not so many as I thought it might take. With time saved, training our flight systems will make up a good portion. Tasha straightened her blouse and said, With Ares launch on the way, getting that first big chunk of market share is key. The sooner we can accommodate people and cargo, the better. Brandon reached for a slice of pizza. That was good thinking, Ole. It should only take some tweaking to compensate for differences in gravity, acceleration, and a tiny bit of air pressure. It's more than I could say for the crawlers I ordered, or rather, the ones Ares launch yanked out from under us. Natasha said, What do you mean? Crawlers have been used for quite a while now. Isn't there enough data to train them here? Ole offered, I don't know, Tash. They have been popular on Earth for 50 years, but that data isn't much good. Learning there has a lot to do with mud, water, wind, jungle, and forest growth with much higher gravity. It's not so easy to separate those factors. Tasha thought briefly, then added, I suppose not. They're being used on the moon, but not extensively. Only the large operators and a handful of independents have them. On Earth, they aren't really used for terrain like this. The environmentalists would be all over them. Brandon replied, That's what worries me. The comparison isn't 1-to-1 for Earth or the moon. They were in such a rush to get them that I doubt they've thought it through. They're blazing out to Noctis Labyrinthus to generate interest for their line, so who knows what they may have overlooked. Tasha said, Why should you doubt them, Brandon? Didn't you see how many PhDs they have on that outing? How on Earth or Mars could anything go wrong? Ole added more hot peppers to his pizza. Tasha, I'm not a superstitious man, but maybe it's best you don't jinx Dr. Suzuki and his team. Tasha said, Oh yeah, I hope I didn't. Should we get word to them to be careful? None of them look like the rugged safari type. Ole said, I still have friendly channels at MUNIS. I'll see what I can do.